The year was 1878. The Arizona Territory was not a place for soft hands or weak wills. It was a land of hard beauty, of red rock canyons that held the sun's heat like an oven, and vast deserts that stretched to a sky too big for a man's soul. Rain was a rumor, a blessing whispered by the elders, not a thing you could count on. Dustfall was the name of the town, and it had earned its name. It was a raw settlement of wood and canvas, clinging to the edge of Fort Red Butte, a military outpost that represented Washington's long, clumsy reach. And beyond the fort, beyond the last fence post, was the land of the Din, the Navajo people. This was a time of tightening. The government in the east, a place most folks here had only heard stories about, was drawing lines on maps. Those lines were a noose, meant to pull the Navajo off their ancestral lands and squeeze them onto reservations. The air itself felt thin, brittle, like it was waiting for a spark. Taze Yazzie knew that tension. He breathed it in with the dust. He was a man near 30, old enough to have seen promises break like dry twigs, but still young enough to fight. He was a warrior and a hunter, his body lean and hard from a life lived on the land. He had, for a season, worn the blue coat of an army scout. He had not done it for their silver coins. He had done it to learn their minds, to understand how the enemy thought. It had been a bitter meal to swallow. It cost him the trust of some of his own people, especially his younger brother, Coda. Coda was all fire and rage, a young man who saw only the long shadow of betrayal. Taze saw the more complicated shape of survival. His first duty was to the land that held the bones of his ancestors. His second was to his people. He had to protect Coda from his own heat and protect the elders from the cold, relentless march of the white man. Eliza Hart was new to this world. She had arrived only 2 months before, stepping off the stagecoach into a cloud of red dust. She was 22 years old, and she carried the East with her, in her manners and her ideals. She was the daughter of Dr. Walter Hart, a good man and a widower who had fled his grief, seeking a place where his skills were desperately needed. Eliza had come to teach the children of the fort and the few settlers in Dustfall. She also assisted her father in his small, clean infirmary, in the language of her time and her upbringing. She was a virgin. This meant more than just the physical truth. She was untouched by the world's true hardness, by the compromises and the violence that survival in this land demanded. She also carried a heavy arrangement, back east, through letters and lawyers. She had been promised in marriage to the fort's commander, Captain Harlan Pike. Her family had called it a sensible match, a way to secure her future. Eliza felt it was a cage. She did not love the captain. She did not even know him. But she was a dutiful daughter. She was also curious. Her curiosity, a bright and restless thing, pulled her toward the very people she intended to control. She saw the Navajo women who came to trade, their quiet dignity, and she wondered about their lives. Captain Harlan Pike was a man of about 35 years. He wore his uniform as if it were tailored armor, and he wore his wealthy Eastern breeding like a badge of superiority. He believed, with a deep and unshakable faith, in the right of the white man to tame this land and the people in it. The Navajo were, to him, a problem, an obstacle to progress. His ambition was a sharp, cold hunger. He wanted promotion. He wanted influence. And he knew the railroad was coming. He had spoken in quiet tones with men in dark suits, men who looked at the sacred canyons and saw only a path for steal and profit. Clear the valley, they had suggested, and the rewards would be great. Captain Pike fully intended to clear the valley. Others were caught between these two unmoving stones. Maria Benali, born of a Navajo mother and a Mexican father, served as a translator at the fort. She understood both languages, but more than that, she understood the silences, the things left unsaid. She watched Taze Yazzie when he came to trade, her heart holding a quiet, impossible ache. She knew his spirit was not meant for fences. And there was Dr. Walter Hart. He clung to his conscience, a fragile thing in this harsh wind. He treated any who were sick, whether their skin was white or red. But he was a man who feared authority. He saw the coldness in Captain Pike, but he did not dare name it. The day everything changed began with an act of mercy. A sickness, a fever in the chest, was moving through a small Navajo camp several miles from the fort. Dr. Hart prepared his black bag. Eliza, ignoring the disapproval of the other officers' wives, insisted on coming. She packed bandages and carried a small bag of peppermint candies for the children. They were at the camp for perhaps 2 hours. The air in the hogan was thick with the scent of fever and wood smoke. Eliza was kneeling, trying to make a small, solemn girl smile. When she heard the sound, it was not thunder. It was a low, heavy roar. The sound of the earth itself groaning. A flash flood. The sky above them was a clear, perfect blue. But miles up the canyon, a storm had broken. A wall of muddy brown water, thick with uprooted trees and rolling boulders, was turning the dry riverbed into a liquid monster. Her father grabbed her hand. "Eliza, the wagon!" But the wagon was already too late. The brown water was swirling around its wheels. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Eliza's throat. Then he was there. Taze Yazzie seemed to rise from the red dust. He did not shout. He moved with a swift, terrible purpose. He seized Eliza by the arm, his grip like a steel band. "This way, now! Leave it!" He half dragged, half pushed her toward the canyon wall, shoving her father ahead of them. He pointed up, to a narrow fissure in the rock, a path only a goat would see. "Climb! Do not look down!" Eliza climbed. She felt her skirt tear on the sharp rock. Her soft hand scraped and bled. Her father scrambled above her, his breathing loud and panicked. Taze was right behind her, a solid, steady presence. When her foot slipped, his hand was there, catching her, holding her firm. They reached a narrow ledge, perhaps 20 feet above the canyon floor. They pressed their backs to the cliff and watched. The brown water churned and roared below them, a primal force of destruction. The wagon, their only way home, was lifted, tossed, and smashed into pieces. The small Navajo camp was simply washed away. Eliza was shaking, her lungs aching. She turned to the man who had saved them, and she looked at him, really looked. This was not the savage of Captain Pike's dismissive dinner table talk. His eyes were not flat or cruel. They were deep, and they held the patience of the stone surrounding them. He was looking at her, too. His gaze passed over her torn dress and her bleeding hands. He saw her fear, but he also saw the strength that had gotten her up the cliff. He saw the woman. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. There was only the roar of the water and the absolute stillness of his gaze. A shout broke the moment. "Down there I see them, soldiers, blue uniforms on the far rim of the canyon." Eliza turned back to Taze, but he was gone. He had made no sound. He had simply stepped back into the shadows of the rock and vanished. He had melted into the land that had made him. The ride back to Fort Red Butte, hours later, was quiet. The soldiers had found a safe path down for them. That night, the fort was alive with a new, sharper tension. The flood had destroyed the camp. The order for removal, the soldiers whispered, would surely come now. Eliza saw Captain Pike later, standing outside the telegraph office. He was reading a dispatch, and his face was hard and satisfied. He had his orders. She walked past her father's infirmary. A lamp was still burning. Dr. Walter Hart was not sleeping. He was sitting at his desk, his head in his hands. Spread out before him were his medical files. He was tracing a single finger down a list of names. They were not the names of soldiers. They were the names of the Navajo children he had been treating that afternoon. The children Taze Yazzie had tried to help save. Her father looked up as she entered, and his eyes were filled with a terrible, helpless fear. He knew what those orders meant. He knew a sickness far worse than fever was about to be unleashed. 3 days after the flood, Captain Harlan Pike announced his grand gesture of peace. He called it a treaty negotiation. He sent riders to the scattered Navajo camps, inviting their headmen to Fort Red Butte to discuss a permanent solution to the land disputes. He presented it as a magnanimous act, a new beginning after the unfortunate natural disaster that had displaced so many. Taze Yazzie received the invitation not as an olive branch, but as a snake held out in offering. He did not trust the captain, but to refuse the meeting would be seen as an act of aggression, giving Pike the very excuse he seemed to be looking for. He agreed to attend, not as a leader, but as a translator and coordinator. He had to hear the lies for himself. The meeting was held in the fort's mess hall, the long tables cleared of tin plates and mugs. A heavy wool blanket spread over the wood. An American flag was draped behind Pike's chair, a splash of color against the drab walls. Eliza was asked to be there. "Your presence will be a civilizing touch, my dear," Pike had said, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "A symbol of the future we are building here. The teacher, the gentle heart." She sat near him, separate from the soldiers, feeling like a prop in a play she did not understand. Pike introduced her formally, first to his own officers, then to the Navajo delegation. "Miss Eliza Hart, our new schoolmistress, who has graciously agreed to be my wife." Taze Yazzie stood across the room, his face like carved rock. He translated Pike's introduction without inflection, but his eyes met Eliza's for a moment. She felt a sudden, hot flush of shame. She saw no recognition of the girl he had pulled from the flood. He looked right through her, as if she were just another piece of the fort's machinery, another blue coat. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. The Navajo elders sat with immense dignity, their face weathered maps of patience and suspicion. Coda was there, standing behind his uncle, his hand never straying far from the knife at his belt. Pike began to speak, his voice smooth and reasonable. He spoke of progress, of shared resources, of the generosity of the United States government. Taze translated. His voice was flat, but Eliza, watching him, could see the muscles in his jaw tighten. Then Pike produced the papers, a stack of white pages covered in dense black script. "This agreement," Pike said, gesturing to the document, "grants your people title to a new territory, a protected reservation where you will receive weekly rations, medical care, and education. In exchange, you will cede these contested outer valleys to the government for settlement." Taze took the paper. He read it. His eyes moved slowly over the English text. He had learned to read their words long ago, a tool of survival. He did not need to translate. He knew what Section 4, Paragraph 2 meant. It was not a trade. It was theft. "He wants the valleys," Taze said in Navajo, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "He wants the water, the good grass. He offers us the dry land to the north, the land the rattlesnakes will not even live in." An old man, a headman named Hastian, spoke. "This is our mother. We cannot sell the land where our grandmothers are buried." Coda took a step forward. "It is a lie," he hissed, his hand gripping his knife. "He thinks we are fools." Taze put a hand on his brother's chest, a swift, hard motion. "Not here," he commanded in their tongue. "Do not give him the violence he wants." He turned back to Pike. "The elders will not sign this." Pike smiled, a thin, patient expression. "You must help them understand. Taze, this is not a request. It is the future. This is the last generous offer they will receive." Eliza looked away from the confrontation. She looked out the dusty window. A group of Navajo children, too young to be allowed inside, were standing in the parade ground, watching the door. They were thin, their clothes patched, but their eyes were bright and proud. One little girl was clutching a doll made from corn husks. Pike was talking about civilization. He was offering rations in exchange for their world. Eliza looked at the children, then back at her fiancé, resplendent in his blue uniform and polished brass. A cold knot of doubt began to form in her stomach. The meeting broke apart without agreement. The elders left, their faces grim. Pike watched them go, his patient smile never wavering. "They will reconsider," he said to his men. "Give them a few days to feel the hunger." Later that afternoon, Eliza was arranging books in the small room that served as her schoolhouse. The door to Pike's adjoining office was slightly ajar. She heard voices, low and confidential. "They refused. Captain, said a voice she did not recognize. A voice with a flat, nasal accent. They refused the paper. Mr. Sims. Pike replied. His voice was different now. The smooth, reasonable tone was gone, replaced by a cold, businesslike edge. It does not matter. The formality has been observed. My employers at the Transcontinental are getting impatient, Mr. Sims said. They need the valley surveyed before winter, and they will have it, Pike said. Eliza froze, her hand hovering over a copy of Pilgrim's Progress. I gave the savages their chance to walk away. When they do not, I will have no choice but to remove them. An unfortunate accident, perhaps. A skirmish started by a hot-headed brave. And the cost? Mr. Sims asked. My reports will reflect a necessary military action to protect settlers, Pike said, his voice dropping. But for your employer's trouble, we clear the valley. The railroad pays double. My men understand the arrangement. Eliza pressed her back to the bookshelves, the hard spine of a book digging into her skin. Her blood felt like ice water. An accident. We clear the valley. He was not a soldier. He was a merchant, trading in human lives, and she was part of the bargain. She stumbled out of the schoolhouse, into the harsh white sunlight. She felt sick. She walked to the edge of the fort, looking out over the vast, empty land. She thought of the children with their corn-husked doll. She thought of the patience in the old men's faces. And she thought of Taze Yazzie. She remembered the solid, warm strength of his hand catching her as she slipped on the cliff, the way he moved. Not against the land, but with it. He had not spoken of civilization or progress. He had simply acted, saving her life, saving her father's life, with a calm competence that made Pike's speeches feel like hollow, dangerous noise. She was trapped. Her entire life, her safety, her future, was tied to Harlan Pike. He was her designated protector, but she now knew he was a monster. Taze Yazzie rode away from the fort with a cold fire burning in his chest. He had known it was a trap. Now he knew the shape of it. They would be squeezed until they starved, or until one of his people, probably Coda, snapped. Then the soldiers would have their excuse. He was halfway back to the high canyons when he heard the shouts. He crested a low mesa and looked down. A small party of Navajo, a man and his 2 sons, were on their way to hunt. They were surrounded by 3 soldiers, their blue uniforms dusty. One of the soldiers was a lieutenant, a man Taze recognized, a man with mean eyes. The soldiers were pulling the bags from the Navajo men's horses. Where is it? The lieutenant was yelling. Where is the beef you stole from the fort? No beef, the father said, holding his hands up. Only corn, for hunt. You are all liars, the lieutenant spat. He backhanded the man, knocking him to the ground. The 2 sons lunged forward, and the soldiers raised their rifles. Taze did not think. He spurred his horse down the sandy incline. Enough, he shouted. The soldiers wheeled around, surprised. The lieutenant scowled when he saw Taz's. This is not your concern. Scout, this is military business. These men are hunters, Taze said, his voice level. He swung down from his horse, placing himself between the soldiers and the Navajo family. They have stolen nothing. How would you know? The lieutenant sneered. You are all the same. He shoved Taze hard in the chest. Get out of our way, or you'll hang with them. Taze looked at the man. He felt the ancient, hot rage rise in him, the urge to draw his knife and end this. But he saw the fear in the son's eyes. He knew that one dead soldier would mean a massacre for his village. He held his ground, but he did not raise a hand. You have no proof, Taze said, his voice dangerously quiet. You do this. You dishonor your own uniform. The lieutenant hesitated. He had not expected the defiance. He wanted a victim, not a confrontation. He looked at Taze, then at the family, then back at Taze. He spat in the dust. This time, he said, you get a warning. Next time, we shoot first. He motioned to his men, and they mounted their horses, riding off in a cloud of their own dust. Taze helped the old man to his feet. The man's lip was split and bleeding. He nodded to Taze, a look of gratitude mixed with fear. Taze watched the soldiers disappear. The army he had once scouted for, the army he had tried to understand, was rotten from the inside out. He arrived back at the main camp as the sun was bleeding red across the horizon. Maria Benali was waiting for him, her face tight with worry. "They did not sign," she said. It was not a question. "No." She pulled him aside, away from the flickering fires, away from Coda, who was angrily sharpening his knife. "It is worse than we thought. Taze," she whispered, her English urgent and low. "I was sorting the captain's dispatches. He has sent for them. The bounty hunters. The ones who hunted the Apache. They are camped by the dry river, waiting." Taze felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. The treaty was a sham. The soldiers were the hammer, and the bounty hunters were the skinning knives, meant to do the work the army could not publicly admit to. "They mean to wipe us out," Taze said. It was a flat statement of fact. "If the treaty fails—" "Yes," Maria said, her eyes wide with fear. "He will say the Navajo have gone to war. He will pay the bounty hunters with railroad money. Taze, they will kill everyone." That night, the air at Fort Red Butte was still and cold. Eliza sat in the small parlor of the commander's house, which she shared with her father. Pike was there, smoking a cigar, his boots propped up on a wooden chest. He was expansive, pleased with himself. Eliza had been silent through dinner. She had pushed food around her plate, the image of Mr. Sims and the sound of Pike's cold voice echoing in her head. She finally looked up. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap, her knuckles were white. "Harlan," she said, her voice small but clear. "Yes, my dear." He smiled at her through the smoke. "Those men today, the Navajo." She took a breath. "If they do not sign your paper, are you going to kill them?" He stopped smiling. He took the cigar from his mouth and studied the ash. He looked at her, his eyes cold and assessing. He had not expected this. He had mistaken her quietness for compliance. "Eliza," he said, his voice taking on the tone of a patient father explaining a hard truth. "This is a hard land. It requires hard men to make it safe. The future of this territory, our future, depends on resolving this situation. Progress has a cost." "That is not an answer," she said, her voice shaking slightly, but holding firm. "They are savages," he said, his patience snapping. "They are standing in the way of a nation. If they will not move, they will be moved. I am building a world that is safe for you, for our children. You should be thanking me." Eliza stared at him. He was not denying it. He was justifying it. He was framing the murder of families, the murder of the children she had seen that day, as a gift to her. She said nothing. She simply stood up, the legs of her chair scraping loudly on the wood floor. She looked at him, at this handsome, well-dressed man who was her intended husband, and she felt a cold, profound emptiness. The woman who had arrived in Dustfall 2 months ago, the dutiful daughter, the future Mrs. Pike, had just died in that parlor. She walked to her room and closed the door. She knew she could not stay. She could not be silent. She went to her father's study. Dr. Walter Hart was reading his Bible, his face etched with worry. "Father," she said, her voice urgent, "we have to warn them. We have to ride to the Navajo camp, now." He looked up, his eyes widening in alarm. "Eliza, what are you saying? That is impossible. It is political. It is dangerous." "He is going to kill them," she whispered, shaking. "I heard him. He is clearing the valley for the railroad. He has hired bounty hunters. Father, he means to kill them all." Dr. Hart stood, his hands trembling. He looked at his daughter, his only child, and then at the door, as if Pike himself might be listening. "We cannot," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We are guests here. We are under his protection. To do such a thing, it would be treason. They would hang us. Eliza, you must not involve yourself. You must promise me." Eliza looked at her father. She saw a good man, but she also saw a man broken by fear. He would not help her. He was asking her to choose her own safety over the lives of hundreds. "I cannot promise that," she said. She went back to her room. She locked the door. She stood in the darkness, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was alone. To do this, she would be betraying her father, her fiancé, her race, her entire upbringing. She walked to her window and looked out at the dark, silent land. She thought of Taze Yazi's eyes, the way he had disappeared into the rock. He was out there, and he was in mortal danger. She began to move, pulling her sturdiest riding skirt from her trunk. She would not be silent. She would not be safe. She would ride. Eliza waited until the fort was wrapped in the deep, false sleep of 2 a.m. The silence was a living thing, broken only by the distant call of a coyote and the measured tread of the lone sentry on the wall. She slid from her bed, her movements practiced from nights of restless thought. She did not light a lamp. She pulled on her sturdiest riding skirt and blouse, lacing her boots with trembling fingers, from her father's medical bag. She took a small bottle of laudanum and a roll of bandages. From his desk drawer, she took the small, pearl-handled revolver he kept, along with a handful of cartridges. She had only fired it once, at a rusted tin can. She hoped she would not need to fire it again. She carried her boots in her hand, walking in her stockinged feet across the wooden floor of the small house. She passed her father's room. She heard his soft, troubled snore. The sound, usually a comfort, now felt like an accusation. She slipped out the back door, into the cold, dry air of the parade ground. Her father's horse, a sturdy bay, was in the livery stable. She had already, hours before, hidden a saddle and bridle in the shadows. She led the horse, its hooves muffled on the packed earth, away from the barracks. She avoided the main gate, heading instead for a low section of the palisade near the quartermaster's stores, a place where the shadows were deep. She slipped through the supply gate, which was barred but not locked from the inside. She was out. Only when she was 100 yards from the walls, in the cover of the scrub brush, did she pull on her boots and mount the horse. She did not know exactly where Taze Yazi lived. She only knew the general direction, northeast, toward the high red mesas that looked like sleeping giants against the stars. She spurred the horse into a nervous trot. She had been gone for less than 30 minutes when the sentry on the wall, restless, took a walk to the livery. He saw the empty stall. He saw the light on in Dr. Hart's house, a light the doctor had lit after Eliza had left, his own conscience stirring too late. The sentry knocked. The doctor appeared, his face pale and haggard. A moment later, the sentry was running to the commander's quarters. Captain Harlan Pike was awake. He was at his desk, reviewing the railroad surveys. When the sentry burst in, Pike did not shout. His face settled into a mask of cold, controlled fury. He did not need to ask where she had gone. He knew. "She has gone to warn them," he said, his voice quiet. He stood and began buckling on his sidearm. "The fool! The sentimental, treacherous fool!" He strode to the barracks and kicked open the door. "Lieutenant Grimes, on your feet. Get 4 men, fast mounts." He walked to the small hut where the 2 civilian trackers were quartered. He banged on the door. "You are up. She is on the doctor's bay, heading northeast." The 2 men who emerged were the bounty hunters he had hired. They were shadows, lean and smelling of cheap whiskey and campfire smoke. Lieutenant Grimes ran up, his uniform half-buttoned. "Sir, Miss Hart has had an episode," Pike said, his voice loud enough for the gathering soldiers to hear. "She is distraught, not in her right mind. You are to find her. You are to bring her back, intact." He grabbed the lieutenant's arm, his fingers digging in. "And Grimes, she is not to reach the Navajo. I do not care what it takes. Do not let her speak to them. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," the lieutenant said, his face grim. "Ride," Pike commanded. The pursuit party, 6 men in all, thundered out of the fort, their horses' hooves striking sparks from the rocks. Eliza had never been a natural rider. She had been taught to ride a side saddle in a shaded park in Boston. This was a wild land, and the horse beneath her was strong and nervous. She pushed it as hard as she dared, her hands aching from gripping the reins. Dawn broke like a wound, spilling pale, incriminating light across the desert. She was exposed, The vast landscape of rock and sand offered no cover, no place to hide. She heard them before she saw them. The drumming of horses running hard. She looked back. 6 riders, dark shapes against the rising sun, closing the distance with terrifying speed. They were soldiers. They were hunters. A puff of white smoke, and the sound of a rifle shot cracked the morning. The bullet whined past her head. A deadly insect. Miss Hart! Halt, in the name of the army. She leaned low over the horse's neck, urging it on. She was terrified. Another shot. This one struck a rock just beside her, spraying her skirt with stone chips. The third shot found its mark. She felt a sudden, hot sting, a line of fire along her left arm, just above the elbow. She looked down. Blood, dark and shocking, was welling through the fabric of her blouse. It was not a deep wound, but the pain and the sight of her own blood made her cry out. The horse, smelling the blood, panicked. It tossed its head, took the bit, and bolted. Eliza lost all control. She was no longer riding. She was merely clinging on. A piece of baggage on a runaway animal. The horse, mad with fear, was running blind, its hooves clattering on stone, heading straight for a deep, ragged cut in the earth. A canyon she had not seen. A dark line where a river flowed. She hauled back on the reins with all her strength, her good arm screaming with effort. The horse slid to a halt, its breath sawing. Just feet from the canyon rim. Below them, perhaps 30 feet down a steep, gravel-covered slope, was a river. It was not wide, but it was green and deep, choked with tall reeds and boulders. She heard the shouts of her pursuers, very close now, perhaps less than 500 yards. She knew, with a terrible, cold clarity, that it was over. If they caught her, they would drag her back to the fort. Pike would lock her in a room. He would smile his cold, patient smile, and he would ride out and slaughter Tase's people. All her running, all her betrayal, would be for nothing. She looked at the river. She looked at the men. She slid from the horse. She grabbed the saddle horn and pointed the horse downstream, along the rim. Then she slapped its flank with all her might. Go, go now! The horse, grateful to be free of her, lunged forward and disappeared around a bend. A distraction. Eliza half fell, half slid down the embankment. Rocks and thorns tore at her skirt and her hands. She landed hard at the water's edge, her ankle twisting. She ignored the pain. The reeds were tall, a thick, green curtain. She pushed her way in, but she knew it was not enough. Her dark blue skirt, her pale blouse, they would be seen. They would search the reeds, and they would find her. She looked at her clothes. She thought of her father, of Captain Pike, of the women back in Boston. And then she thought of the Navajo children with their corn-husk dolls. Her fingers, numb and clumsy, went to the buttons of her blouse. She ripped it open. Tearing the fabric, she pulled it off, her wounded arm throbbing. She fumbled with the hooks of her heavy skirt, her hands shaking so violently she could barely work them. The skirt fell into the shallow water at her feet. That left the corset, the bone and canvas prison that had shaped her entire life. She clawed at the laces, breaking a fingernail, sobbing in frustration. Finally, it came loose. She threw it from her. The chemise and drawers followed. She stood for a single second, naked under the vast, uncaring Arizona sky. Then she waded into the river. The water was shockingly cold. It stole her breath. It plastered her hair to her face and kissed her skin with an icy tongue. She was shaking, not just from the cold, but from a profound, bone-deep terror and a shame that burned hotter than the sun. She pushed through the reeds and sank down until the water was at her chin, until only her face was exposed, hidden by the green stalks. She had done it. She had erased herself. Tase Yazzie was already there. He had been tracking the 2 bounty hunters since they had made camp. He had seen the soldiers ride out from the fort, and he had known with a sick certainty what it meant. He had followed, keeping to the high ground, a ghost moving parallel to their path. He saw the entire chase from the opposite side of the canyon. He saw the lone rider, the pale blouse, the runaway horse. He saw her tumble down the embankment. Now he watched as the soldiers, led by the trackers, reined in on the rim above. "The horse went that way," the lieutenant shouted, pointing. "She must be down there." Taze saw a splash in the reeds below, a ripple that did not belong to the current. He thought it was the woman, perhaps wounded, or one of the soldiers who had fallen. He moved down the canyon wall like water himself, silent, using cracks in the rocks as stairs. He slipped into the river 50 feet upstream from the reeds, making no sound, creating no splash. He dove, his eyes open, the current pulling him. He swam underwater, a brown shadow in the green depths. He expected to find a tangle of skirts, a boot, a struggling body. He reached into the reed bed. His hand brushed against something. It was not wool. It was not a canvas. It was skin, soft, smooth, warm even in the cold water. And it was bare. He surfaced slowly, letting only his head and shoulders rise within the dense curtain of reeds. She was there, not 3 feet from him. Water streamed down her face, which was white with shock. Her eyes were wide, black pools of terror. She opened her mouth to scream. He put one wet finger to his lips. Shh! She froze. She recognized him, the man from the flood. The terror in her eyes did not fade, but it was joined by a new, more profound horror. A wave of hot, agonizing shame washed over her. She crossed her arms over her breasts, trying to sink lower, to disappear into the mud. "Do not you dare look," she hissed, her voice a desperate, trembling whisper. Taze did not look down. He kept his eyes locked on hers. He saw the girl he had pulled from the cliff. He saw the captain's promised wife. And he saw that she was neither of those things any longer. She was someone new, someone forged in desperation. He uncoiled a long, thin rope of cured deerskin from his waist. Underwater, where the soldiers could not see. He looped it gently around her shoulders, pulling her just slightly toward him, anchoring her. Hoofbeats sounded on the bank. Just above their heads, rocks tumbled into the water. "I see nothing." It was the lieutenant, his voice tight with anger. "She is not in the water. A white woman would not—" A torch flared. One of the bounty hunters had lit it. Its orange light cut through the green reeds, dancing on the surface of the water, just inches from Eliza's face. Taze acted instantly. He pulled her back, pressing her body against the cold, undercut stone of the canyon wall. His body was in front of hers, a solid, living shield. She was trapped between the rock and him. She could feel the hard muscles of his chest and stomach, the warmth of his skin through the thin, wet buckskin. She was pressed against him from her knees to her shoulders. It was the most intimate, terrifying, and strangely safe she had ever felt. She was trembling violently. He leaned his head close, so close his lips brushed the shell of her ear. The soldiers were shouting, their boots scraping on the stone right above them. He whispered, his voice a low rumble, barely louder than the river's flow. "The water's warm." She stiffened. The words made no sense. She thought he was mad. He felt her confusion. He leaned closer. "So am I. Stay still. Little teacher." It was the last thing in the world she had expected. A jest, a tease, in the middle of this nightmare. It was so absurd, so human, that a tiny, hysterical bubble of laughter, a sound that was half a sob, caught in her throat. The violent trembling stopped. She stopped fighting the cold and the fear, and, for a moment, just focused on the solid warmth of the man who was hiding her. "She must have been washed downstream," the lieutenant finally yelled. "Or she's in the rocks up ahead," one of the trackers said. "She is smart. This one, spread out. Find her." The hoofbeats and the voices moved away, following the river. Taze and Eliza waited. They did not move. They listened. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10. The sounds faded, replaced by the rush of the river. "They are gone," Taze murmured. "For now." He helped her move from the reeds, his hand firm on her arm. She was clumsy, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely stand. He led her along the bank to a shallow, dry cave hidden by a curtain of old willow. Once inside, he turned his back to her. It was a gesture of profound, unspoken respect. She stood there, dripping, shaking, her arms still crossed. He pulled his buckskin shirt over his head. His back was a map of old scars and smooth, powerful muscle. He handed the shirt to her over his shoulder. "Put this on," he said. She stared at his back for a long moment. Then, her fingers numb, she pulled the shirt on. It was still warm from his body. It smelled of wood smoke, cedar, and him. It was huge, falling to her knees like a dress. She felt, for the first time in hours, almost human. She stammered, trying to find words. "I had to—" He turned. His face was unreadable, his eyes serious. He went to the back of the cave and, with a flint and steel, built a tiny, smokeless fire. A fire so small it was little more than a handful of glowing embers. "Why?" he asked. She sat on the dry floor, pulling the shirt tight, and she told him. The words poured out of her, tumbling over each other. The meeting, Mr. Sims, the railroad, the bounty hunters, the promise of double payment to clear the valley, the fake treaty. "He is going to kill them all," she whispered, the tears finally coming, hot and fast. "He is not a soldier. He is a murderer, and I was supposed to be his wife." Taze listened. He did not move. His face remained a mask, but his eyes filled with a darkness that frightened her. The last small ember of hope he had carried, the faint possibility that Pike was just a bully, that the army could be reasoned with, was gone. It was not a misunderstanding. It was an extermination. He looked at this woman, this white woman, the captain's woman. She was shivering in his shirt, her face stained with tears and river mud, a bloody streak on her arm. She had thrown all of it away. Her name, her safety, her future. She had stripped herself bare, in every way a woman could, to bring him this warning. She had done it for his people. "You cannot go back," he said. His voice was flat. It was not a question. It was a sentence. "I know," she whispered. The wound on her arm was beginning to throb, a deep, burning ache. He moved to her, kneeling. He looked at the bloody tear in the sleeve of her chemise, which she still wore under his shirt. "Let me see," gently, his touch surprisingly deft. He tore the sleeve away. He examined the raw groove the bullet had made. He nodded, then pulled a small pouch from his belt. He took out a dried piece of root, chewed it into a paste, and pressed it firmly onto the wound. Eliza hissed as it stung, but then, almost instantly, the burning ache faded to a dull throb. "They will hunt you now," he said, his eyes on her face. "As they hunt us." "Then I will be hunted," Eliza said. Her voice was steady. The tears were gone. She met his gaze, and he saw the same iron resolve he had felt in her in the river. He nodded slowly. The decision was made. The world had shifted. "You will come with me," he said, "to my village." He knew what it meant. He knew the risk. Coda would be furious. The elders would be suspicious. To bring a white woman, the captain's woman, into their hidden camp. It was a spark thrown into a dry canyon. But she was warned. She was the proof of the betrayal. "It will be hard," he said, standing. Eliza stood with him, clutching the buckskin shirt around her. "It is already hard," she replied. "Let us go." He did not start walking until he had circled back to the river, moving like a shadow through the dawn light. Eliza huddled in the small cave, his shirt a comfort, the paste on her arm a dull, cooling fire. He returned 20 minutes later. He was carrying her clothes. The heavy skirt and the remnants of her chemise were soaked, muddied, and torn. He said nothing, just handed them to her. He also carried one of his bedrolls, while she retreated to the back of the cave to change. Wringing out the wet fabric, he worked. Her boots were gone, lost in the river or taken by the soldiers. He took a heavy piece of cured buckskin from his pack and, with his knife, cut 2 large, rough circles. He punched holes in the edges and threaded them with thin leather thongs. When she emerged, her wet skirt clinging uncomfortably to her legs, he handed them to her. "Put these on," he said. "They are not ladies' shoes, but they will hold on." She sat and tied the rough moccasins around her feet and ankles. They were clumsy, but they were a barrier against the stone. The journey began. Taze set a hard pace, moving not through the open land, but through a maze of shallow canyons and washes, a path that would leave little sign. For Eliza, it was torture. She was an Eastern lady, accustomed to cobblestones and carriages. Now, she was climbing rock faces that tore at her hands, her ankles turning on loose gravel. The sun was an enemy, a physical weight pressing down on her, reflecting off the red rock until her eyes burned. After 2 hours, she stumbled, falling hard onto her knees. The sharp stones tore through the rough moccasins. She cried out, a small, sharp sound of pain. She felt a hot, humiliating rush of tears. She wanted to stop. She wanted to lie down and let the desert take her. Taze stopped. He turned and looked at her. He showed no pity. Get up, he said. I cannot, she whispered, the tears cutting clean paths through the dust on her face. My feet, I cannot. Then you will die here, he said, his voice flat. Pike's men will find you, or the buzzards. Get up! His coldness was a slap, more effective than a kind word. Anger, hot and bright, burned through her exhaustion. How dare he? She pushed herself up, her legs shaking. I am coming, she snapped. She thought of the children. She thought of the faces in her father's infirmary, the small, solemn girl with the corn-husk doll. She put one foot in front of the other. Taze watched her. He saw the shift, the spark of iron that pushed through the softness. He nodded once, a small gesture, and turned. Continuing the climb, he began to teach her. He did not speak in long sentences, but in short commands. He would stop, pointing. This, he said, indicating a squat, ugly cactus. He sliced it open with his knife. A pale, milky liquid welled up. Water, drink, Eliza hesitated. It looked foul, but her throat was a dry husk. She bent and drank. The liquid was thick, tasting of roots and dust, but it was moisture. It saved her. He taught her how to walk. On the stone, he said. Not the sand. The sand holds your shape. He would stop her suddenly, his hands shooting out to bar her path. He pointed. Eliza looked, seeing nothing but a patch of shadowed gravel. Then a piece of the gravel moved. A rattlesnake, coiled and waiting, its pattern a perfect match for the stones. Taze stepped around it, giving it a wide berth. The desert does not hate you, he said, his voice low. But it will kill you if you are stupid. He was walking beside her, this warrior, this man who was technically her enemy, and yet he was keeping her alive. His own mind was a battlefield. He needed her. Her information was the only thing that could save his people from a massacre. She was the proof of Pike's treachery. But to bring her into the hidden valley, it was a violation. It was bringing the wolf into the den. He could not look at her without seeing the blue coats. He remembered his first time as a scout, a boy of 16, proud to be riding with the soldiers, proud to be a bridge between two worlds. He remembered the betrayal. He remembered the long, forced march, the long walk, when his people were herded like cattle. He remembered his mother, her cough growing worse in the winter cold, her body weaker, until one morning. She did not wake up. The white man's promises were poison, every single one. He looked at Eliza. She had been promised to Pike. She was one of them, bred from the same pale, treacherous stock, but she had also stood in the river, naked and terrified, having thrown her entire world away to warn them. He did not understand her. He did not trust her, but he had to protect her. This conflict warred inside him, a cold knot beneath his ribs. That night, the cold was as brutal as the sun had been. The desert gave up its heat instantly, the temperature plummeting. Taze found a shallow overhang of rock that would hide the small, smokeless fire he built. Eliza huddled by it, but the fire was not enough. She was shaking violently, her wet clothes clinging to her, her wounded arm throbbing with a deep, cold ache. Taze watched her. Her skin was turning blue in the firelight, her teeth chattering so hard she could not speak. He cursed under his breath, in his own tongue. If she got sick, She would die, and his proof would die with her. He moved, his blanket in his hand. "Come," he said. She looked up, confused. "You will freeze." He sat with his back against the rock wall and wrapped his heavy wool blanket around his own shoulders. He opened one side of it. "Sit, here." She understood. She hesitated, her Eastern modesty recoiling. He was a man, a savage, as Pike would say. "Do you want to live?" he asked, his voice rough with impatience. She crawled over and sat beside him. He wrapped the blanket firmly around her, pulling her back against his side. His body was a furnace. She was pressed against him from her shoulder to her hip. She could feel the hard, lean muscles of his side and leg. She was closer to him than she had ever been to any man, including her own father. Her heart began to hammer, a wild, fast beat against her ribs. She was terrified, but she was also warm. The shaking began to subside. "This is for survival," he said, his voice flat, his gaze fixed on the fire. "I know," she whispered. She could feel his heart, too. It was not the frantic beat of her own. It was a slow, steady, powerful rhythm, the sound of the mountain. She closed her eyes, exhausted, and for the first time, leaned her head against his shoulder. He stiffened, but he did not pull away. They sat in silence for a long time. The fire crackled. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you scout for them? Maria told me you did. If you hate them so much." He was still, and she thought he would not answer. "I was a boy," he said finally, his voice low. "I thought I could be a bridge. I thought I could learn their ways, and they could learn ours. I thought I could protect my people by knowing the enemy. What happened? They did not want to learn. They only wanted to take it." He paused. "My mother died on a march they forced. They called it a relocation. They promised us food. They promised us safety. Her grave it is not where it should be. It is not with her people." Eliza felt a sharp ache in her chest, a grief that had nothing to do with the cold. "I am sorry," she whispered. She found herself telling him about her own cage. "It was an arrangement, a treaty of my own, my family. They wanted me to be safe. Harlan Pike has money and a name. They did not ask me if I wanted to be safe. They just told me I would be." He turned his head, his face very close in the darkness. "And what did you want?" "To teach," she said. "To draw. To see what was over the next hill. Not to be a piece of property." He looked at her, and for the first time, she thought he truly saw her. Not as a white woman, not as Pike's fiancée, but as her, another person in a cage. He said nothing, but his gaze was heavy. The next day, the sky turned a sickly, sulphurous yellow. The wind began to rise, not as a breeze, but as a low, mournful howl. Taze stopped, sniffing the air. "Storm," he said. He grabbed her hand. "Run!" He pulled her toward a jumble of boulders. A dark crack, barely wide enough for a man, opened in the rock. "Inside, go!" She scrambled into a shallow, dusty cave. Taze followed, rolling a small boulder to partially block the entrance. The world outside disappeared. The wind screamed, a high, thin wail. And then the sand came. It was a solid, stinging wall of grit that blotted out the sun, turning the day to a suffocating twilight. The sand forced its way through the cracks, filling the small cave. It was in her mouth, her nose, her eyes. She began to cough, a dry, panicked hack. Taze pulled the small canteen from his belt. He poured a little of the precious water onto a cloth from his pack. "Cover your mouth," he commanded. "Breathe through this." He held the wet cloth for her, pressing it gently over her nose and mouth. They huddled in the dark, the storm howling around them like a living monster. They were knee to knee, their eyes inches apart, the only two people in a world that was tearing itself apart. He held the cloth steady, his hand warm on her face. She looked into his eyes, and she was not afraid, not of him. They stayed that way for 2 hours, until the wind finally, reluctantly, died down. The world was new, scoured clean. They crawled out, gasping in the clear air. They had survived it, together. They were 2 days from the valley, moving through a narrow pass, when they found the men. 3 of them. They were not soldiers. They were rough men, with greasy hair and the cold, dead eyes of the bounty hunters from the river. "Well now," one of them said. He was a large man, with a tobacco-stained beard. He grinned, showing broken yellow teeth. "Look what we found. Boys, it's the scout." And he found the captain's runaway woman. Taze pushed Eliza behind him, his hand moving to his knife. "This is not your path," he said, his voice level. "We are walking." "The captain," the man said, ignoring him. "He pays $300 for her return, alive and mostly unharmed." He chuckled. "And he pays $50 for any Navajo scalp. Looks like a fine day's work." The 3 men fanned out, raising their rifles. Taze moved. He was not a man. He was a blur. He had been carrying the snake he had killed, saving it for its meat. He threw it, a coiled, heavy missile, straight at the leader's face. The man screamed, swatting at it, his rifle firing wildly into the air. In that second of chaos, Taze was on him. He did not use his knife. He used a heavy stone he had palmed from the ground, striking the man hard at the temple. The man crumpled. The second man raised his rifle, aiming at Taze. "No!" Eliza screamed. She did not think. She grabbed a rock from the ground, just as Taze had shown her. She threw it with all her strength. It was a clumsy, desperate throw, but it struck the rifle barrel. The shot went wide. Taze used the opening, lunging for the second man. He tackled him, and they rolled in the dust. Taze trying to get to the man's knife hand. The third hunter, seeing his partner down, aimed his gun not at Taze, but at Eliza. "Stupid girl," he hissed. Eliza's mind went clear and cold. "Look out!" she shrieked, pointing behind the man. "Soldiers a patrol!" It was a lie, a desperate, childish lie. But it worked. The man hesitated, his head jerking around to look. It was all the time Taze needed. He slammed the second man's head against a rock, stunning him. He snatched the man's knife and threw it, all in one fluid motion. The blade spun, embedding itself deep in the third hunter's shoulder. The man screamed, dropping his rifle, clutching the wound. Taze was on his feet, breathing hard, his face a mask of controlled violence. He walked to the wounded man, who was whimpering. He pulled his knife free. "Run!" Taze ordered him. "Take your friends. Tell your captain, the rocks of this land have teeth." The man, bleeding and terrified, needed no second telling. He scrambled to his feet, grabbed his unconscious partner, and dragged him away. Stumbling back down the pass, Taze watched them go. Then he turned to Eliza. She was shaking, the adrenaline, the fear, the sudden, brutal violence. It hit her all at once. She had helped. She had lied. She had thrown a rock that had saved his life. Taze walked to her. He saw her trembling, her face pale. He put his hands on her shoulders. "You are safe," he said, his voice low. She looked up at him. Her eyes were wide and wild. Her hair was a tangled mess, and her face was streaked with dirt. She whispered. "I threw the rock." "I know," he said. His voice was soft. "You were fast." They just stood there, his hands on her shoulders. The heat of his palms seeped through the thin fabric of her blouse. The world was silent, save for their breathing. He looked at her, at this impossible woman, this warrior. She looked at him, the man who had taught her, who had protected her, who had huddled with her in the dark. He leaned his head down. His face was close, his eyes searching hers. She felt his breath, warm on her cheek. She was not afraid. Her lips parted slightly. She closed her eyes. He stopped. He was an inch from her mouth. He could smell the dust in her hair and the faint, female scent of her. He was fighting a war inside himself. He wanted this. He wanted her. But he saw the faces of his people. He saw the scorn. He saw the impossibility of it. He took a sharp breath and straightened, pulling his hands back as if burned. The moment was broken. "We must go," he said, his voice rough. "We are close." He turned and started walking. Faster this time. Eliza stared at his back for a moment, her lips still tingling. She touched her fingers, then hurried to catch up. They walked in silence for another hour, climbing the last high ridge. As the sun set, they reached the top. Taze stopped. Below them, hidden from the world, was a deep green valley. A small river, a bright ribbon of silver, ran through it. Small flocks of sheep grazed on the slopes. Smoke rose from the smoke holes of 24 hogans, hidden among the trees. "My home," Taze said. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. Eliza felt a deep, aching wave of hope. Taze did not look at the valley. He looked at her. His face was grim. "My people are down there," he said. "They will not be happy to see you. They will see a white woman. They will see the captain's woman. They will see an enemy." Eliza looked from the peaceful valley to his hard, worried face. She was terrified. But she was no longer the girl who had fled the fort. She was the woman who had survived the river, the desert, and the hunters. She nodded. "I would rather they hate me for trying to save them," she said, her voice quiet but steady, "than hate myself for doing nothing." Taze looked at her for a long, long time. He saw no fear in her eyes, only resolve. He nodded. "Come," he said. "Let us face them together." They walked down the narrow, winding path, the scent of juniper and wood smoke rising to meet them. The valley floor was a patchwork of green pasture and reddish earth. Eliza, walking behind Taze, felt as if she had stepped into a secret world. The first to see them were the children. They were playing by the shallow river, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls. They stopped, their small bodies freezing. Their eyes widened. They looked at Taze, and then at Eliza. The laughter died, one by one. They turned and ran, scrambling up the bank to hide behind their mothers, who were washing hides by the water. The women looked up, their hands still, their faces hardening into masks of suspicion. Men, who had been repairing a small corral, stopped their work, their hands moving slowly to the knives at their belts. The entire village went silent. The only sound was the wind and the bleating of a few distant sheep. Maria Benali stepped out of a central hogan, a basket in her hands. She saw Taze and her face lit with relief. But then she saw Eliza, who was still wearing Taze's buckskin shirt over her own tattered clothes. Maria's smile collapsed. Her eyes filled with a shocked, sharp disbelief. Then Coda appeared. He strode toward them, his face a mask of fury. He stopped 10 feet from his brother, his eyes burning. "Brother," Coda said, his voice low and dangerous. "What have you done?" He spat on the ground. "You bring a wolf into our home. You bring the captain's woman." Several other warriors began to gather, their expressions just as hostile. "He has betrayed us," one of them murmured. "He brings the white eyes to our hidden places." "Silence," Taze commanded. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the rising tension. He did not look at Coda. He looked toward the largest hogan, where an old man, Hastin, had just emerged, leaning on a stick. "We must have a council, now. What she has to say, you must all hear." Taze motioned for Eliza to follow. She kept her head high, though she could feel the hatred from every direction. It was a physical force, pressing against her. She walked behind him into the smoky, dim light of the council hogan. It was a large, circular building. A low fire burned in the center. The elders were already gathering, their faces grim. Taze told Eliza to sit by the entrance, a place for the uninvited. The warriors, including Coda, crowded in after them, standing along the wall. The air was thick with mistrust. Taze stood in the center. He spoke, his voice echoing in the enclosed space. He told them everything. He told them of the meeting at the fort, the paper that offered them rattlesnake land. He told them of the rumors Maria had heard. Then he pointed to Eliza. "She is the proof," he said. He looked at Maria, who had followed them in, her face pale and conflicted. "Translate for her," he ordered. Maria moved to Eliza's side, kneeling. An elder, Hastian, looked at Eliza. his eyes dark and penetrating. "Speak, white woman," he said. Maria translated the simple command. Eliza's voice trembled, but she did not falter. She told them what she had heard. She spoke the name of Mr. Sims. She spoke of the railroad. And then she said the words that sealed her fate. "I heard the captain say it," she said, Maria's voice following hers, turning the English words into the sharp, liquid sounds of the Navajo language. "He said, 'We clear the valley.' He said, 'The railroad pays double.' He is not planning to move you. He is planning to kill you. He has hired the bounty hunters to do it." A low, angry groan filled the hogan. Coda stepped forward, his hand on his knife. "She lies," he shouted. "It is a trick. Why do we listen to a white woman? She is Pike's. He sent her. She is a spy. Here to count our warriors, to see our defenses." Another man, a tall warrior with a fresh scar on his cheek, nodded. "Coda is right. She is the captain's whore." Eliza flinched as if struck. "She is not a spy," Taze said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Then she is a hostage," the scarred warrior shouted, gaining courage. "Let us send her back to the captain, in pieces. Let him see what we think of his treaties." "No," another man yelled. "We trade her. We trade her for rifles, for ammunition. She is valuable." The room erupted. Coda lunged forward, grabbing Eliza by her sore arm. She cried out in pain. In a flash, Taze had his knife out, the blade pressed against his brother's throat. "You will not touch her," Taze breathed. The hogan fell silent. Coda froze, his eyes wide with fury and betrayal. "You would kill me for her." "I will kill anyone who brings stupidity into this council," Taze said, his voice like ice. He slowly lowered the knife. "She is not a hostage. She is a witness." He looked at the elders. "You see her skin. I see her actions. She threw away her life, her safety, her name, to bring us this warning. She did this knowing she could never go back. She faced the river, and she faced the desert. She fought the hunters who tried to take her, and she did not cry out." Just as he finished, a woman burst into the hogan, her face frantic with terror. She ran to one of the elder women, sobbing, pulling at her arm. "It is my son," she cried in Navajo. "He cannot breathe the fever. He is burning." Eliza did not need the translation. She understood the panic, the universal language of a terrified mother. She looked at Maria. "What is it?" "Her boy," Maria said, her own anger momentarily forgotten. "The lung fever, the one your father saw." Eliza stood up. The warriors stared at her. "I can help," she said, her voice clear. "I have medicine. I'm a doctor's daughter. I know this sickness." Coda laughed, a short, bitter sound. "A doctor's daughter. She will poison him." The mother looked from Coda to Eliza, her eyes torn with indecision. Eliza ignored Coda. She ignored Taze. She walked straight to the mother and looked into her eyes. "I can help him," she repeated, her voice soft but full of iron. Taze stepped forward. He spoke to Hastian. "This is the test. Let her try. Judge her by her actions, not her color. If she lies, if she harms the boy, I will kill her myself. But if she helps, then you will know her heart is true." Hastian looked at Eliza for a long, silent moment. He saw her torn clothes, the blood stain on her arm, the exhaustion in her face, but he also saw the resolve. He nodded once. "Go," he said. Eliza ran from the hogan, the mother leading the way. Taze followed, standing guard at the entrance. The hogan was small and thick with the smell of sickness. A small boy, perhaps 6 years old, was lying on a sheepskin, his chest hitching with a terrible, shallow, wheezing breath. His skin was hot to the touch. This was the boy she had seen at the fort, the one who had clutched the corn-husk doll. "Boil water," she commanded, looking at Maria, who had followed. "And bring me cool clothes, as many as you have." For the next 2 days, Eliza did not leave the hogan. She used the tiny bit of laudanum she had saved, a single drop on her finger, to ease the boy's racking cough so he could rest. She forced sips of water between his cracked lips. She bathed him, changing the cool clothes every few minutes. fighting the fever with relentless patience. The village watched. The woman brought her small bowls of corn mush, which she ate without tasting. Taze sat outside the door, his rifle across his knees, saying nothing, simply present. On the third morning, the boy's fever broke. His breathing, while still rough, was deep and even. He opened his eyes and asked for his mother. The woman wept, holding Eliza's hands, pressing them to her cheek. She said something in Navajo, her voice thick with gratitude. "She says," Maria translated, her own voice soft, "that you have the good hands, that you are a walker in worlds." The mood of the village shifted. It was not a sudden change, but a slow, quiet turning. The hostile stares were replaced by looks of curiosity. That afternoon, Hastian the elder approached her. He held out his arm, which was bent at an awkward angle, his face tight with pain. "A fall," he said. Eliza examined it. A badly set break, old and inflamed. "It will hurt," she told him, with Maria translating. "I must break it again, to set it right." The old man looked into her eyes, then nodded. "Do it. The crooked branch does not hold the weight of the snow." She did it, swiftly, cleanly, causing a sharp, agonizing pain that made the old man grunt, but she set it straight, binding it with flat sticks and strips of hide. He looked at his arm, then at her. He did not smile, but he nodded. It was a sign of profound respect. The children were the next to come. They crept close, their dark eyes wide. Eliza, resting by the stream, took a piece of charcoal from a dead fire. On a flat, white rock, she drew a simple shape, a box with a triangle on top. "House," she said. They giggled. One bold little girl, the sister of the boy she had saved, pointed to the sky. "Yeah," the girl said. "Sky," Eliza replied, smiling. They sat for an hour, exchanging words. The tension was broken. Maria watched all of this. She had seen Taze sitting outside the sick boy's hogan, his eyes never leaving the doorway. She had seen the way he looked at Eliza now, a look that was no longer just protective. It was something deeper. Maria's heart ached with a jealousy that was sharp and bitter. She had known Taze all her life. She had hoped, one day, he would see her as more than just a translator. And now this white woman, this soft, pale woman who knew nothing, had come and captured his gaze. Later, she saw Eliza trying to grind corn, using the heavy stone metate. She was clumsy, scraping her knuckles raw, her movements awkward and inefficient. A few of the other women were watching, whispering and laughing quietly among themselves. Eliza's face was flushed with humiliation, but she did not stop. Maria sighed. Her jealousy was a stone in her stomach, but her sense of fairness, her respect for strength, was stronger. This woman was a fool, but she was not weak. Maria walked over. "You are holding it wrong," she said sharply. The other women fell silent. Eliza looked up, surprised. "Like this." Maria knelt, taking the mano stone. "Let the stone do the work. Push. Do not scrub." She showed her the long, rhythmic motion. Eliza tried again. It was still clumsy, but it was better. "Thank you, Maria," Eliza said, her voice quiet. "I am not doing it for you." Maria replied, her voice still clipped. "I am doing it for Taze. He has brought this trouble. We must all survive it." She paused. "And you must be careful. Do not walk between a man and his fire. It is bad luck, and do not look the elders in the eye for too long. They see it as a challenge to your authority." It was a truce, an offering. Eliza understood. The fragile peace was shattered 2 days later. A rider was spotted, a Navajo scout, coming hard from the south. He did not slow as he entered the village, but galloped straight to the council hogan, throwing himself from his horse before it had even stopped. "Taze!" he shouted, stumbling. "Taze! They are coming!" The village froze. Taze and the elders ran from the hogan. "What did you see?" Taze demanded. "Pike is moving." The scout gasped, his chest heaving. "He is not waiting. He has all the soldiers, all of them, and the bounty hunters, and, brother, He has the wagon that speaks thunder, the one that shoots many bullets. A cold dread settled over Taze. The Gatling gun. And more, the scout said, his eyes wide with fear. Boxes, many wooden boxes, the exploding powder, enough to bring down the mountainside. The women began to wail. This was not a raid. This was an army of annihilation. The council gathered instantly, the air thick with panic. We must run, Hastien said, his voice cracking. We must take the children and flee into the high mountains. We will hide in the winter camps. No, Coda slammed his fist against the Hogan wall. We fight, this is our land, we ambush them in the pass. We will rain arrows upon them. We will die here, on our own land, as warriors. And we will die, Taze said, his voice cutting through the noise. Our arrows will not stop the thunder wagon. Their powder will seal us in the caves. Fighting them here, now, is suicide. It is what Pike wants. So we run like cowards, Coda sneered. Taze was torn. Fleeing meant starvation in the high mountains. Their winter supplies were here, in this valley. Fighting meant a massacre. Eliza, who had been standing by the door, suddenly spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried in the sudden silence. You must not do what he expects, she said. Everyone turned to her. She looked at Maria, who translated. If you fight them in the past, Eliza said, looking at Coda, you will kill some of them, but they will kill all of you. Pike will send a report to his generals that he was attacked by a savage war party. He will be a hero. They will send 1,000 more soldiers to hunt down the survivors. She turned to Hastien. If you run, he wins. He gets the valley. He will tell the railroad it is empty. Your people will starve in the winter, and he will be given a medal. Taze looked at her, a new respect dawning in his eyes. She was right. She understood the white man's mind. She saw the shape of the lie. We need a third way, she said. Taze nodded. She is right. We cannot run, and we cannot fight his army. Not yet. He began to pace the small space, his mind racing. We must break the snake's fang before it can bite. He stopped. This is what we will do. Hastien, you will lead the elders, the women, and the children. You will take them to the high caves, the old winter camp. Take what food you can carry. Coda. Coda looked at him, defiant. You will take 20 warriors. You will go to the high pass. You are the bait. Draw their fire. Make them think our whole force is there, but do not engage. You are a shadow, a distraction. Lead them on a chase, but do not let them trap you. Your job is to slow them down. Coda hated the order, but it was a warrior's task. He nodded. And you, brother? Coda asked. I will take 5 men, Taze said. We will not go to the pass. We will go around, through the high rocks. We will hit a supply train. An army with no food, no bullets, and no powder is just a group of angry, hungry men. We will take the thunder wagon. We will take the powder. I am going with you, Eliza said. Every head in the Hogan snapped toward her. No, Taze said instantly. It is a raid. It is too dangerous. You are a woman. I am a witness, she corrected him, stepping into the center of the Hogan. You do not understand their world. You need me. If you are caught, you are just an Indian raider, and they will hang you. But if I am caught, I am a white woman. I am his fiancée. I am the one who can speak. She looked Taze in the eye, her gaze unwavering. I am the only witness his society will believe. I am the only one who can tell the truth about Mr. Sims and the railroad. If there is any chance to stop this without a war, I must be there. Taze looked at her. She was not the soft girl from the fort. She was not the terrified woman in the river. She was made of iron. She was right. She was not just a witness. She was his only weapon that was not a knife or a gun. He gave a short, sharp nod. You will ride. You will do exactly as I say, and you will not slow us down. The high pass was a throat of red rock, a narrow choke point just wide enough for a wagon. It was the only way Pike's column could reach the flatlands that led to the hidden valley. And it was here, in the oven-hot shadows of the cliffs, that they waited. Taze Yazzie lay flat on a ledge, 100 feet above the canyon floor. He, Coda, and 20 of their best warriors were scattered among the boulders. They had worked all night, prying loose the massive stones, setting the deadfall trap. Eliza and Maria were wedged into a shallow crevice 20 yards back, a position that offered cover but a clear view of the pass below. Eliza held her father's small revolver. It felt impossibly heavy, a cold, useless weight in her sweating palm. Taze had offered her a rifle. She had refused. She was here as a witness, she had told herself, a shield, not a killer. Maria, her face grim and set, held a rifle, and she looked like she knew how to use it. They heard the army before they saw it, the clatter of hooves on stone, the metallic jingle of harnesses, the low, angry shouts of men. A small group of figures appeared at the mouth of the canyon, walking, not riding. Eliza squinted against the sun. They were not soldiers. They were thin men, dressed in white cotton shirts and straw hats, carrying shovels. "Dine," Maria whispered, confused. "No," Taze said, his voice a low, sickened growl. "Mexicans, laborers from the railroad camp. He is using them." Eliza's blood went cold. She saw Pike riding behind them on his tall black horse, flanked by his soldiers. He had placed the unarmed workers at the front of his column. He was using them as a human shield. He was daring the Navajo to fire first, to slaughter innocents so he could justify his own war. It was a move of such profound, casual cruelty that Eliza felt her stomach heave. "What do we do?" Coda hissed, his finger tightening on his rifle. "We cannot fire on them." "We wait," Taze said, his jaw tight. "We wait for the wagons." The laborers shuffled past, their faces slick with sweat and fear. They looked up at the silent cliffs, sensing the danger. Behind them, the blue-coated soldiers marched, and behind the soldiers came the prize. The first wagon was a heavy caisson, pulled by 4 mules. On it, covered in canvas, was the unmistakable, deadly shape of the Gatling gun. Behind it, a second, larger wagon was piled high with wooden crates. The powder. Taze let the laborers clear the narrowest part of the pass. He let the first rank of soldiers walk into the trap. He waited until both wagons were directly beneath the poised boulders. "Now," he shouted in Navajo. "Now." The warriors, who had been waiting with long poles as levers, threw their weight against the keystones. The mountain groaned. For a moment, there was only a shower of pebbles, and then, with a sound like thunder, the entire side of the cliff seemed to slough off. Boulders the size of horses, tons of red rock, crashed down into the pass. The chaos was absolute. The soldiers screamed. The Gatling gun wagon was hit first. The lead mule was crushed instantly. The wagon itself was flipped, the caisson splintering, the heavy gun tumbling into the dust, its carriage smashed beyond repair. The powder wagon, its driver leaping clear, was buried, its axles snapping with a sound like a gunshot. Horses screamed, rearing, throwing their riders. Soldiers scattered, firing their rifles wildly at the cliffs, their bullets sparking off the stone. "Now!" Coda roared, and the Navajo warriors opened fire, their shots adding to the panic. Eliza watched in frozen horror. A young soldier, no older than she was, his face pale with freckles and terror, ran for cover almost directly below her. He tripped, fell, and looked up, his eyes locking directly with hers. He raised his rifle. "Shoot!" Maria screamed, shoving her. "Eliza, shoot!" Eliza did not think. She raised the small revolver, her hand shaking so violently she could barely aim. She did not aim at his chest. She aimed at the rock wall, a foot above his head. She squeezed the trigger. The gun jumped in her hand, the sound small and sharp. The bullet sparked off the stone. The young soldier cried out, ducking, and scrambled away. She had fired. She had fired at another human being. She felt a wave of nausea, but there was no time for it. Taze was not fighting to kill. He was fighting to break. He moved from rock to rock, his rifle firing with a terrible, measured pace. He aimed for knees. He aimed for hands. He aimed for the horses. He saw a soldier trying to pull a box of ammunition from the wrecked powder wagon. Taze fired. The bullet struck the man's shoulder, spinning him around. He wanted to stop the army, not make martyrs of its men. He knew the difference. He knew it would matter later. Coda had no such reservations. He fought with the pent-up rage of a man who had seen his home threatened. He fired to kill. He saw Lieutenant Grimes, the man who had struck the old hunter, trying to organize a line of defense. Coda smiled, a grim, wolfish expression. He raised his rifle, taking careful aim. Taze saw the look. He knew that hatred. He lunged, striking the barrel of his brother's rifle just as it fired. The shot went wide, striking the ground at the lieutenant's feet. "He was mine!" Coda screamed, whirling on his brother, his face contorted with rage. "We are not murderers," Taze shouted back, shoving him against the rock. "We are stopping them. We are not him." The argument, lasting only a second, was a fatal distraction. One of the bounty hunters, the man whose shoulder Taze had wounded in the pass, had climbed up the far side of the canyon. He was not a soldier. He was a hunter. He did not aim for the man who was yelling. He aimed for the man who was in command. He aimed for Taze. He fired. Taze was still pushing Coda. He saw the puff of smoke too late, but Coda, in his rage, shoved Taze back. Coda moved into the path of the bullet. It struck him high in the right shoulder, spinning him around. The force was incredible. He made a sound, a sharp grunt of pained surprise, and looked down. A dark, wet stain was spreading across his buckskin shirt. His rifle slipped from his fingers. He staggered, and then fell. "Coda!" Taze's roar of rage and anguish echoed through the canyon. He forgot the battle. He forgot Pike. He lunged for his brother, dragging him behind the cover of a massive boulder. Eliza saw it all. She saw Coda fall. She saw Taze's face, a mask of pure terror. The training her father had drilled into her took over. The terror she had felt, the shaking in her hands, it all vanished. She was no longer a teacher. She was a doctor. "Maria, fire!" she commanded, her voice sharp and cold. A voice Maria had never heard. "Fire at that man on the ridge. Keep their heads down." Maria, stunned by Eliza's sudden authority, obeyed. She rested her rifle on the rock and began to fire, a steady, measured rhythm. Eliza grabbed the bag of bandages she had brought. She left the cover of her crevice, crawling on her hands and knees. Bullets snapped past her, whining, so close she could feel their hot breath. A ricochet struck the rock by her hand, spraying her face with stone dust. She did not stop. She reached the boulder and slid behind it. Coda was conscious, propped against the rock, his face pale as ash. He was trying to push Taze away. "It is nothing," he hissed. Taze was frantic, trying to press his hand against the wound, but blood, bright and arterial, was pumping between his fingers. "Hold him," Eliza ordered Taze. Taze looked at her, his eyes wild. "Hold him still now," she commanded. Stunned, Taze obeyed. He pinned his brother's good arm and torso against the rock. Eliza ripped Coda's bloody shirt open. The wound was a ragged, terrible hole. "It went through," she said, her voice fast and professional. "That is good. Hold this." She grabbed Taze's hand and pressed it hard against the exit wound. She took her own wad of bandages and pressed it against the entrance. "You must hold pressure," she said, her hands already covered in his blood. "Do not let up. Do not let up for any reason." Coda looked at her, his eyes glassy with pain and hatred. "Get your white hands off me," he gasped. "Be quiet," Eliza snapped, pressing harder. "Or you will bleed to death. I do not care if you hate me, but I will not let you die." The firing from below was beginning to falter. The trap had worked. The pass was completely blocked by the rock slide. The Gatling gun was a ruin of splintered wood and twisted metal. The powder was buried. The element of surprise was gone. Captain Harlan Pike sat on his horse, just outside the kill zone. He looked at the chaos, at his dead and wounded men, at the impassable canyon. His face was black with a rage so pure it was almost silent. This was a disaster. His career, his agreement with the railroad. It was all turning to dust. He looked up, scanning the cliffs, his eyes burning. Through the drifting gun smoke, he saw them. He saw Taze Yazzie, kneeling behind a boulder. He saw the warrior he had come to destroy, and then his gaze shifted. He saw the person kneeling beside him. He saw the dark hair, unbound and wild, falling over a blood-soaked shoulder. He saw the pale skin, streaked with gunpowder and dirt. He saw Eliza. She was not a captive. She was not a prisoner. Her hands were on the wounded Navajo, her body angled to protect him. She was one of them. Pike's rage, which had been a hot, burning fire, turned instantly to ice. This was not a military defeat. This was a betrayal. She had not just run from him. She had run to him. She had chosen this savage, this red animal, over him, over civilization, over her own race. His hand went to the revolver at his hip. He could shoot her, right now. He could end it. Taze saw him. He saw Pike watching them. He saw the revolver. He shifted his body, covering Eliza and Coda as best he could. Their eyes met across the smoking canyon. The soldier and the warrior. The two men who claimed a right to this land. The two men who had, in their own way, laid a claim to the woman between them. Pike lowered his hand. Killing her now was too fast. It was too easy. "We have to go," Taze said, his voice a low growl. He had seen the look in Pike's eyes. This was not over. This had just become something far worse, something personal. "We cannot move him," Eliza said, her voice shaking, the adrenaline starting to fade. "He has lost too much blood. We will carry him," Taze said. He turned to his brother. "Coda, can you stand? Coda!" His teeth gritted, nodded. "Fall back," Taze shouted to his men, his voice echoing. To the high valley pull back. The Navajo warriors, their task complete, did not hesitate. They were masters of this kind of warfare. They faded back into the rocks, carrying two of their own wounded, disappearing like smoke. Taze put his arm under Coda, lifting. Coda screamed as the movement tore at his shoulder. Eliza scrambled to his other side, taking his good arm, draping it over her own shoulders, her small frame straining under his weight. Together, the three of them half-dragged, half-carried Coda up the rocky slope. Pike watched them go. He watched his fiancée, the woman he was to marry, struggling to save the life of a wounded warrior. He watched her disappear over the ridge, into the wilderness, with Taze Yazzie. He did not order a pursuit. His men were broken. The pass was blocked, but it did not matter. He knew where they were going. Eliza, Taze, and Coda collapsed in a hidden ravine a mile from the battle. Eliza was shaking. Her hands, her arms, her blouse, they were covered in Coda's blood. She looked at her hands, at the dark, sticky red, and a wave of profound shock hit her. She had seen men die. She had seen the raw, torn flesh of Taze's brother. She thought she would be sick. But underneath the horror, she felt a cold, hard certainty. She had done it. She had helped. And she knew if they had not, those bullets and that powder would have been used on the children. Taze was looking at his own hands, red with his brother's blood. He had won a victory. He had saved them. For now. But he had shed blood. He had led a battle. He looked at Eliza, who looked like a ghost, her eyes wide and dark. "You saved him," he said, his voice rough. Eliza looked at Coda, who was conscious, glaring at her with a mixture of pain and pure hatred. "He still hates me," she whispered, her body trembling. "But he is alive," Taze said. "That is all that matters." Back in the canyon, Captain Harlan Pike was reforming his command. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "leave the wagons. Leave the dead. Get every man who can ride. We are going over the ridge. We are not waiting. We are going to that valley, and we are going to burn it to the ground. We will leave nothing." "But, sir," the lieutenant protested. "The pass. We make a new pass," Pike said, his eyes cold as glass. "And, Lieutenant, find her. She is not to be harmed. She is to be brought to me. I will deal with her myself." The retreat from the pass was a nightmare of blood and fire. Coda, delirious with pain, was a dead weight between Taze and Eliza. They scrambled over the high, rocky ridges, the sounds of Pike's reforming army a dull, angry roar behind them. 2 other warriors helped. Trading places, their faces grim. They reached the hidden valley as the sun, a merciless eye, climbed to its peak. Panic had already taken root. The scouts had seen the failure at the pass, seen the army bypass the rock slide by taking a harder, higher goat path. They were coming. Hastin, the old headman, was directing the evacuation. Women, their faces tight with terror, loaded what corn and dried meat they could onto their backs. They grabbed their children, lashing babies to cradle boards, and began the long, slow climb toward the high caves, a place of ancient defense, hidden near the canyon's rim. "He is coming," Taze said, his voice raw as he and Eliza lowered Coda to a sheepskin in the largest hogan. "He is not coming with wagons. He is coming with rifles and powder. The caves must be defended," Hastian said, his voice frail. "No," Taze said. "They are a trap. That is what he wants. He has the exploding powder. He will seal the caves and bury us alive. We defend the valley. Here, at the entrance." Eliza looked at Coda. His breath was shallow, his skin clammy. He had lost too much blood. "I cannot move him again," she said. She was no longer asking. She was stating a fact. This hogan, the most central and defensible, was now a hospital. "Maria," Eliza commanded, her voice sharp, cutting through the fear. "Get me water, boiled, and every clean strip of cloth you can find." Maria, seeing the blood, seeing Eliza's hard, competent expression, did not argue. She ran. Eliza cut away the rest of Coda's shirt. She cleaned the wound as he hissed. His eyes slit of pain. She packed the holes, front and back, with a poultice of chewed root Taze had given her, then bound his chest tightly with strips of cloth. "He must not move," she told Taze. "If he fights, he will bleed again." The remaining warriors, perhaps 30 of them, began to build barricades. They overturned the one wagon they owned, stacked stones at the mouth of the valley, and took up positions in the rocks, their old rifles and bows at the ready. They did not have to wait long. A line of blue-coated soldiers appeared on the ridge, dark silhouettes against the bright, hostile sky. They were not marching, they were scrambling, a disorganized line of angry men. Pike was at their lead, his face black with dust and fury. The 2 bounty hunters moved on the flanks, their movements quick and predatory. Pike's men formed a loose skirmish line at the edge of the shallow valley. They had rifles, they had powder, and they had torches. His intent was clear. He was not here to capture. He was here to erase. Taze was on a high rock, 50 yards from Eliza's hospital hogan. He raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel. He waited for Pike to take one more step. Eliza looked at the wounded, at the terrified face of Maria, at Coda, who had slipped into a shallow, fevered sleep. She thought of the women and children climbing to the caves. She could not let this happen. She handed her bag of bandages to Maria. "Keep pressure on that," she said, nodding at another wounded man who had been carried in. "Where are you going?" Maria's voice was sharp with fear. "To be a witness," Eliza said. She stood. She walked out of the hogan. She did not run. She walked, her hands empty and held high, into the open space between the 2 lines. Her white blouse, stained with Coda's blood, was a flag of truce. The firing stopped before it began. Every man on both sides froze. "Harlan!" she shouted. Her voice, clear and strong, echoed off the canyon walls. "Harlan Pike, stop this!" The soldiers looked at her, then at their captain. This was the white woman they were told was a captive. She was not bound. She was not afraid. She was furious. Pike strode forward, his revolver in his hand. He stopped 30 yards from her. "Eliza," he said, his voice a low, shaking growl. "Get away from them." "No," she said, taking another step toward him. "It is over. Harlan, I know everything. I know about the Transcontinental. I know about Mr. Sims. I know about the bounty. I will testify." He stared at her. This was the ultimate betrayal. She was not just defying him. She was humiliating him. In front of his men, in front of the savages. "You are a traitor," he hissed, his voice loud enough for his men to hear. A traitor to your race. You are as savage as they are. I am a citizen, she countered, her voice ringing. And you are a murderer. If you take one more step, if one more shot is fired, you will hang for this. She is addled, Pike screamed, turning to his men. Her mind is broken. They have bewitched her. Fire on the line. Fire! His men hesitated. They looked at the lone, unarmed woman. They looked at their captain, his face contorted with a rage that looked like madness. The young soldier, the one from the pass, raised his rifle. He looked at Eliza. He looked at Pike. He could not. He fired his rifle, but he shot high. Into the sky. Useless, Pike roared. He raised his own heavy revolver. He leveled it, not at the warriors, but at the center of Eliza's chest. If you will not be my wife, you will be my victim. I will do it myself. Taze had been watching. His muscles coiled. He had seen the soldier hesitate. He saw Pike aim. Eliza down, he screamed. He launched himself from his rock. He was a blur of motion. He hit her at the waist. A hard, flying tackle that took her breath away. They crashed to the hard earth just as Pike's revolver fired. The bullet, a hot snap of air, passed through the space where her heart had been a second before. Taze did not pause. He rolled, shielding her body with his own, pulling her behind a low stone wall that marked the edge of a cornfield. The battle began. Pike's shot broke the spell. The soldiers, their loyalty now forced, opened fire. The valley exploded in a rolling crash of gunfire. Bullets tore into the hogans, ripping through the dried mud and straw walls. The Navajo warriors returned fire. Arrows, silent and deadly, arced from the rocks. Old rifles barked, their black powder smoke filling the air. It was a desperate, one-sided fight. Advance, Pike screamed. Burn it all. Soldiers with torches ran toward the nearest hogans. The two bounty hunters, ignoring the soldiers, were flanking, moving toward the river, looking for easy kills. Taze shoved Eliza toward the medical hogan. Stay down, do not move, no matter what. He scrambled back to his position, his rifle hot in his hands. The air was thick with smoke and the screams of wounded men. He saw Pike standing near a juniper tree, directing his men, reloading his revolver. He was exposed. Taze raised his rifle. It was an easy shot. 200 yards. He was a hunter. This man had tried to murder Eliza. This man was here to slaughter his people. His finger tightened on the trigger. He thought of his mother, dead on the long walk. He thought of Coda, bleeding in the hogan. He stopped. He saw Eliza, her face pale, crawling from the hogan to drag a wounded warrior inside. If he killed Pike, he would be a hero for a minute, and his people would be damned for a generation. The army would send a regiment. They would send a general. They would hunt the dying to the last child, all in the name of the murdered hero. Captain Pike. He could not win the war by killing this one man. He had to win the peace. He needed Pike alive. He needed the lie to be exposed. He lowered his rifle. He whistled. A sharp, hawk-like cry. 4 of his best warriors, men who moved like shadows, crawled to his position. The old way, Taze said in his own language. The tunnel under the river. We go behind them. We cut the head from the snake. We take the captain. The warriors nodded. They slipped, one by one, into a deep fissure in the rock. A pathway that led to an ancient, dry lava tube that passed under the river. They would come up behind Pike's entire force. The medical hogan was a scene from hell. 3 wounded Navajo lay on the floor. Eliza was working frantically, her hands sticky with blood. Maria was holding a cloth to a man's chest, her face pale. Coda was awake. He was weak, but his eyes were clear. He was watching Eliza. He watched her tear her own petticoat into strips for bandages. He watched her calmly, her voice low and steady, giving orders to Maria. The battle was moving closer. Bullets were thudding into the hogan's thick walls. The young soldier, the one who had hesitated, suddenly appeared in the doorway. He was breathing hard, his eyes wide with horror. He raised his rifle. Eliza, Coda, and Maria all froze. Please, Eliza said, her voice quiet. She did not beg. We are tending the wounded. Look, is this a war? There are women and children in those caves. Your captain, he lied to you." The soldier looked past her, at the bloody floor, at the wounded men. He looked at Coda, a warrior, helpless on the ground. He tried to kill you," the soldier stammered. "He did," Eliza said. "He is doing this for money, for a railroad. He is murdering these people for profit. This is not a service. This is a crime." The soldier's face crumpled. He looked at his rifle, as if seeing it for the first time. I did not know." "Then stop," Eliza said. A bounty hunter, the one whose shoulder Taze had wounded, ran up behind the soldier. "What are you doing? Boy talking, kill them all." The hunter raised his rifle, aiming at Eliza. The young soldier did not think. He turned and slammed the butt of his rifle into the bounty hunter's face. The hunter went down in a spray of blood and broken teeth. The soldier looked at Eliza, his face pale. He dropped his rifle. "I am done," he said. "I am not a murderer." Pike's attack was faltering. The Navajo defense was too stubborn. His men were disorganized, their morale broken by his attempt to kill Eliza. Suddenly, a war cry erupted from behind them. Taze and his 4 warriors burst from a stand of willows by the river. They were not firing to kill. They were a force of pure, focused violence. They hit the soldiers' rear line, tackling men, using knives to cut rifle straps, knocking them unconscious. The move caused total panic. The soldiers, already wavering, now believed they were surrounded by a much larger force. "Drop your weapons," Taze shouted in English, his voice a commanding roar. Pike spun around, his face a mask of disbelief. Seeing Taze Yazzie not 20 feet from him, he had been flanked. He raised his revolver, his hands shaking with rage. Taze did not wait. He threw his empty rifle like a spear. The heavy stock struck Pike in the chest, knocking him backward. Taze was on him in 2 bounds. He slammed his fist into Pike's jaw, a blow that snapped the captain's head back. Pike fell. Taze's knife was at his throat before he hit the ground. "It is over, Captain." Taze breathed, his face inches from Pike's. Seeing their commander down, his throat bared to a Navajo knife. The remaining soldiers gave up. They threw down their guns. Several turned and fled, scrambling back up the ridge they had just descended. The battle was over. The valley fell into a sudden, shocking silence, broken only by the crackle of a burning hogan and the groans of the wounded. Taze held Pike pinned to the ground. The captain, his eyes swelling, spat blood onto the dust. Coda stumbled out of the hospital hogan, supported by Maria. He was pale, sweating, but his eyes were filled with a burning, triumphant fire. "Kill him!" Coda gasped, staggering forward. "Do it, brother! Kill him now! For our mother! For all the bones they have scattered!" The other warriors gathered, their faces hard. "Kill him!" one of them echoed. "He has brought the torch to our homes." Taze looked down at the man in his grasp, the man who had tried to murder the woman. The woman he cared for, the man who would have slaughtered every child in the caves. His hand tightened on the knife. The urge to end it, to let the hot blood pour into the dust, was a physical sickness in his throat. "No!" The voice was Eliza's. She walked from the hogan, her arms and blouse soaked in blood. She was no longer a lady. She looked like a pagan priestess, coming from a sacrifice. Coda glared at her. "This is not your place, white woman." "I am in this place," she said, her voice ringing with a cold, hard authority that silenced him. She walked until she stood over the 2 men. "Look at me, Coda, look at this blood. If you kill him now, this blood will mean nothing. His story, the story of a brave captain, ambushed and murdered by savages, will be the only one that is told. They will send 1,000 more just like him. They will hunt you down." She lowered her gaze, locking it with Taze's. Her eyes were not pleading, they were commanding. "But if he lives," she said, her voice dropping. "If we take him back, if he is put on trial, then my story can be told. The truth. The railroad, Mr. Sims, the lies, We do not need his death. Taze. We need his life. We need his crimes to be heard in their own courtroom." Taze looked from the hate-filled face of Harlan Pike to the desperate, bloody, and brilliant face of Eliza. He looked at his brother, who was demanding the vengeance of the past, and he looked at the woman, who was offering the only possible path to a future. He slowly, agonizingly, pulled the knife away from Pike's throat. He stood, pulling the dazed and bleeding captain to his feet. He looked at his warriors. "Bind him," he said. "He is going back." The journey back to Dustfall was a slow, grim procession. It was not a march of victors. It was a caravan of broken men and hard truths. Harlan Pike, his hands bound tightly, rode his own horse, his face a swollen mask of disbelief and silent, bottomless fury. He was surrounded. Taze Yazzie and 3 Navajo warriors rode with him, their rifles held ready, but they were not his only guards. The young soldier who had defied him, and 3 others who had thrown down their guns in the valley, rode as well. They were deserters in the eyes of the army, but they were also the most powerful witnesses to the captain's madness. Eliza rode beside Taze. She had washed the blood from her arms in the river, but her blouse was still stained a dark, rusty brown. She felt the stares of the soldiers, a mixture of awe and confusion. She felt the steady, protective presence of Taze at her side. He had not left her alone for a single moment. They were tied together now, not by choice, but by the blood they had seen and the choices they had made. When they crested the last ridge and Dustfall came into view, the town seemed to stop. A blacksmith, his hammer raised over an anvil, let it fall with a dull clang. Women, who had been hanging laundry, stood with clothespins in their hands, their mouths open. Men stepped out of the saloon, their whiskey forgotten. They could not understand the sight. They saw their captain, Harlan Pike, the iron hand of the fort, being led into town like a common criminal. They saw his own soldiers, their uniforms torn and stained, riding escort. And they saw the Navajo. They were not walking in chains. They were riding, proud and armed, as equals. Dr. Walter Hart ran from his infirmary, his face pale with a week's worth of terror. He saw his daughter, alive. He saw her, riding not with her fiancé, but with the tall warrior. He saw the blood on her clothes, the exhaustion in her face, and the hard, unshakable strength in her eyes. This was not the girl he had sent from the east. This was a woman he did not know. "Eliza!" he cried, running forward. Eliza slid from her horse. She did not run to him. She walked, her steps measured, and embraced him. "I am all right, Father," she said, her voice quiet. "But we have to see the sheriff. Now." The local sheriff was a man named Hobbs, a man who preferred his town quiet and his paperwork simple. He came out of his office, his badge pinned to a food-stained vest, his face slack with confusion. "What is this?" he demanded, his hand moving to his own gun. "Taze Yazzie, what have you done?" "He has done nothing," Eliza said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the growing crowd. "We have brought a criminal for you." "A criminal?" Hobbs blustered, looking at the bound captain. "That is Captain Pike. You cannot—" "He is a murderer," the young soldier said, stepping forward. "We saw it. He gave the order to fire on the valley. He tried to kill Miss Hart himself." The crowd gasped. This was not a raid. This was a mutiny, or a revolution. I cannot," Hobbs stammered. "This is a military matter. This is not for me." "It is a territorial matter," Eliza insisted. Walking up to him, he hired civilian bounty hunters. He conspired with the railroad to commit mass murder, and I am the witness, as is Private Jensen. She nodded to the young soldier. The crowd was pressing in now, their suspicion turning to a hungry, shocked curiosity. The men from the saloon, the blacksmith, the wives of the officers from the fort, they were all there. "Get him in my office," Hobbs said, his nerve finally failing him. He unlocked the cell. "And lock him in." Taze and another warrior pushed Pike into the small, dark room. Pike, silent until now, turned. He looked at Taze. "You will hang for this. Savage," he hissed. Then he looked at Eliza. "And you will be in a cell next to him. We need a statement," Eliza said, ignoring him, turning back to the sheriff. "We all need to give one, for the territorial judge." For the next 4 hours, the sheriff's small office was the center of the world. Sheriff Hobbs, sweating and overwhelmed, took down the testimony. He heard it from Private Jensen, who spoke of the captain's rage and the order to fire on an unarmed woman. He heard it from one of the Mexican laborers, who had been found wandering in the desert, who testified they were used as human shields. And then he heard it from Eliza. She stood in the middle of the room, her father by her side, Taze standing guard at the door. She spoke, her voice clear and without a single tremor. She told them everything: the meeting in Pike's office, the voice of Mr. Sims, the promise of double payment from the Transcontinental, the fake treaty, the plan to clear the valley, and finally, she told them how Harlan Pike had aimed his revolver at her, and how Taze Yazzie had saved her life. When she was finished, the room was silent. Dr. Hart was weeping quietly. Sheriff Hobbs just stared at the pages of notes, his hands shaking. He knew this was not a local issue. This was dynamite. The immediate threat was over, but the social battle had just begun. Pike was in a cell, but the town's prejudice was not. As Taze stood on the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, the crowd watched him. Their fear of Pike was gone, but their suspicion of the Navajo remained. They looked at Taze, at his knife, at his long hair. He was the savage who had brought this chaos. Then they looked at Eliza, standing near him, speaking to him in a low, comfortable voice. The whispers started. They were quiet, like dry leaves skittering in a gutter. She was with them. A woman from the fort commissary whispered to another, "For days. Riding with him? Alone," the other replied, her eyes narrow. She was the captain's woman. Now look at her. She is ruined. "I heard," a man from the saloon stage whispered, "that she, well, you know, with him. The way they look at each other. She has betrayed her race." The poison spread. It was more effective than any bullet Pike had fired. Eliza was no longer the brave witness. She was the fallen woman, the one who had slept with an Indian. Taze heard it. He saw the looks. He saw the women who had once smiled at Eliza now pulling their skirts aside as she passed. He saw the men looking at her, their gaze a mixture of contempt and a new, ugly curiosity. He had brought this on her. By saving her, by letting her help, he had destroyed her. In her world, a woman's reputation was her life, and he had taken it. He knew what he had to do. Later that evening, as the sun set, Eliza found him by the stable, checking the straps on his saddle. He was not checking them. He was preparing to ride. "Where are you going?" she asked. Taze did not turn. He kept his hands on the leather. "Back to the valley. My people need to rebuild. Coda. His wound is deep." "You are leaving," she said. It was not a question. It was an accusation. "You are leaving now. Tonight." "Pike is in a cell," Taze said, his voice flat. "Your testimony is given. It is done. You are safe now." "Safe?" she asked, her voice rising, a sharp, hysterical edge to it. "Safe, I am not safe. Taze, do you hear what they are saying? Do you see how they look at me? They think I am your whore. They think I am a traitor. My father, he will not even meet my eyes. You call this safe?" He finally turned to her. His face was a mask of pain. "That is why I am leaving. If I am gone, the whispers will stop. They will say you were a captive, that you were forced. They will forgive you. You can go back to your life." Eliza stared at him, her chest tight with a cold, rising fury. She had faced down soldiers. She had stared into the barrel of Pike's gun. She would not be undone by this man's misplaced honor. "You are a coward," she said, her voice low. He flinched, but she stepped closer, jabbing a finger into his chest. "You are a coward. You will face down an army, but you will run from a few old women whispering, 'You will let them win. You will let them define me after everything.' You are just going to ride away and leave me to face this storm alone. I am doing this for you, he shouted, his voice raw. I am doing this to save you. Look at you, you have no place here now. And you have no place with me. What life can you have? Eliza. In the valley grinding corn, hiding from the next patrol, or here hiding from the whispers, I have taken your world from you. I will not. Take the last thing you have. What is it you think I have left? She demanded. Tears of rage and exhaustion welling in her eyes. My good name, my reputation, my world. She laughed. A harsh, broken sound. My world ended 3 days ago. Taze. It ended when I was naked in that river, with soldiers hunting me. It ended when I was a white woman, hiding, and you, a Navajo, were the only man in the world who kept me safe. My world ended, and a new one began. She stepped back, her voice dropping to a fierce, shaking whisper. You are wrong. I do have a place. I thought my home was where you were standing. But if you ride away, if you leave me now, then I truly have nothing. Taze stared at her. This woman, this iron and fire and water. He was trying to protect her, and she was refusing. She was demanding he see the truth, that he was her anchor, and if he left, she would be set adrift. Eliza, he whispered, his voice cracking. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her face. If I stay, they will destroy you. Let them try, she whispered back, pressing her cheek into his palm. I love you, he said. The words tore out of him, a confession, a surrender. I love you, and I do not want to see you. Broken. My old world is broken, she said, her voice strong. Not me. We are not broken. Taze, not if we stand together. The next morning, the town was called to a meeting. It was not a formal trial, but a council. Hastian and several of the Navajo elders rode in, their faces grim. Dr. Hart was there. The blacksmith was there. The officers' wives were there, their faces pinched with judgment. Sheriff Hobbs presided, looking miserable. We have to decide what to do, Hobbs said, wiping his brow. Captain Pike is in my cell. The army from Fort Grant is 2 days' ride from here. We have to have an answer for them. The answer is justice, Dr. Hart said, his voice shaking but firm. He looked at his daughter, and for the first time, his eyes were full of a terrible, aching pride. My daughter has spoken the truth. These people, the Navajo, they were to be murdered. What about her? One of the wives demanded, pointing at Eliza. What is to be done about her? She lived with them. She fought with them, against our soldiers. She saved our lives, Private Jensen said, his voice loud in the silence. The captain tried to kill her. She saved us from a massacre. She is a hero. She is a problem, Hastian said, Maria translating. She is a white woman. If she lives in our valley, Pike's soldiers will have an excuse to return, to rescue her. They will never leave us in peace. And he, the blacksmith said, nodding at Taze. He cannot stay here, not in Dustfall. It is not right. It will only bring more trouble. The man led an attack on soldiers. They were trapped. Eliza and Taze looked at each other. They were caught between two worlds, and neither would have them. Then we will make a new place, Eliza said. Everyone turned to her. The trading post, she said, her voice gaining strength. The one at the bend in the river. It is abandoned. It is not in Dustfall, and it is not in the valley. It is in the middle. It is the bridge. Dr. Hart looked at her, his mind seeing the possibilities. A clinic, he said, his voice hopeful. A place for both people. A neutral ground. A school, Eliza added, her eyes bright. A place where Navajo children can learn English, and white children can learn that they are just children. Hastian and Taze spoke in low, rapid Navajo. Taze turned. My people will agree. A trading post, a fair one, where our wool and silver are traded for a fair price, not for whiskey, for tools, for flour. Maria. She will help. Maria, standing in the back, looked shocked, but she nodded. The townspeople murmured. It made sense. A buffer. A place of trade, not war. And who? The blacksmith asked. We'll run this place. Who will we trust? Taze Yazzie stepped forward. Into the center of the circle, he stood beside Eliza. The townspeople fell silent. He was tall and proud, and for the first time, he did not look like an outsider. He looked like a leader. He took Eliza's hand. He held it up, their fingers entwined, for all to see. He spoke, first in the rolling, liquid words of his own language, a vow to Hastian and his people. Then he turned to the white faces of Dustfall, his English clear and perfect. She will, he said, and I will. I have chosen her. I choose her now, and I choose her forever. She is my wife, in the eyes of my people, and in the eyes of the land itself. What you whisper? It is just wind. This, he said, holding her hand tighter, is the rock. The crowd stared, stunned into silence by the sheer, raw power of his declaration. Eliza felt the world settle. The storm had passed. The whispers were just wind. She was no longer afraid. She turned her back to the crowd, to her father, to all of them. She looked up, into Taze's eyes. I chose you, she said, her voice quiet, meant only for him. I chose you the day I sank into that river. I just did not know it yet. The arrival of the Army detachment from Fort Grant, 2 days later, brought the crisis to its head. A major, a man with a graying mustache and tired, professional eyes, rode into Dustfall expecting to find a full-blown Indian war. He found, instead, a town divided, a decorated captain in a cell, and a story that defied all military logic. He listened. He sat in the sheriff's office for an entire day. He listened to Private Jensen, who spoke with a low, steady shame, detailing the orders, the pursuit, and the captain's attempt to shoot Miss Hart. He listened to Dr. Walter Hart, who presented his own records, showing his long history of treating the Navajo, proving they were not hostile, but families. And finally, he listened to Eliza. She came before him, not as a victim, but as a composed, articulate witness. Taze Yazzie stood behind her, his presence in the room a silent, non-negotiable fact. She laid out the timeline, the railroad meeting, the names, the bounty, the clear and premeditated nature of Pike's plan. She spoke not with hysteria, but with a cold, clear anger that was more powerful than tears. The major, a man who had seen combat, understood the difference between a battle and a massacre. Harlan Pike was removed from the cell. He was placed in irons. He was put on a military wagon, not as a commander, but as a federal prisoner, to be escorted to Prescott for a full territorial court-martial. His power was broken. The news of the trial, when it came weeks later in a letter to Dr. Hart, was anticlimactic. Faced with the testimony of his own soldiers and the damning evidence of his conspiracy with the railroad, Harlan Pike was found guilty. Guilty of abuse of authority, of conspiracy, of conduct unbecoming, and of attempted murder. His career was over. His name was disgraced. The message, slow as it was clear justice could, on rare occasions, be found, but only if someone was willing to bleed for it. In Dustfall, the change was slow, like a desert bloom after a rare rain. The whispers about Eliza did not stop. Not entirely. The women from the fort still looked at her with suspicion, but suspicion was a luxury. Survival was a necessity. The Navajo began to come down from the valley, not to raid, but to trade. They had the best horses, tough and sure-footed. The blacksmith, who had been skeptical, found he needed those horses, and his horseshoes fit them well. The Navajo women brought blankets, woven with a skill that made the commissary's thin wool look like rags. The town's merchants, seeing the color of silver, began to find their prejudice flexible. The center of this new world was the abandoned trading post at the river's bend. The rebuilding of it was the first act of peace. Taze and his warriors, men who had fought Pike's soldiers, now worked alongside Private Jensen, who had been honorably discharged, and the blacksmith from town. They raised new walls, put a solid roof on the building, and built a new, strong corral. In the Navajo Valley, life returned. The women and children came down from the caves. They began to rebuild the one hogan that had burned. They replanted the small cornfield the soldiers had trampled. Coda was alive. He lay in his family's hogan, his shoulder bound tightly, the fever a constant, dull fire. Eliza had set the bone, cleaned the wound, and stopped the bleeding. But it was infected. Eliza, seeing the dark red streaks, knew she was at the limit of her knowledge. She went to her father, Dr. Walter Hart, who had spent a week wrestling with his conscience, his fear and his pride in his daughter, looked at her. "I will go," he said. He rode with Eliza into the Navajo Valley. The people watched him, their faces suspicious. He was another white man, another doctor, but Taze walked at his side, and Eliza led him into Coda's hogan. For 3 days, Dr. Hart and Eliza worked together. He lanced the infection, cleaned the wound with carbolic, and stitched the torn muscles with a surgeon's skill. Coda, weak and in too much pain to be defiant, was forced to accept the care of the white doctor. While he recovered, his body healing, his restless mind had nowhere to go. He watched Eliza. She came every day, not just to check his bandages, but to help his sister grind corn, to teach the children. One afternoon, she sat beside his pallet, holding a small, tattered book. "Sky," she said, pointing up through the smoke hole. "Yeah," she repeated, using the word the children had taught her. Coda, silent for a week, finally spoke. His voice was a hoarse rasp. "Sky," he repeated. It was his first English word. He had realized, in his stillness, that his brother had been right all along. A knife was a good weapon. But knowing the enemy's language, that was a better one. Eliza and her father rode back to the trading post that evening. They stopped their horses on the ridge, looking down at the small cluster of buildings. "He will live," Dr. Hart said. "Thank you, Father," Eliza said. He began, his voice thick. He stopped his horse. "I am sorry. Eliza, I was afraid. I asked you to be silent when I should have been shouting. I have never been more proud of you." "I was afraid, too," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But you did it anyway." The trading post became the bridge. A typical day began with the sun. Taze would be at the corral, negotiating with a rancher for 3 Navajo ponies, his voice calm, fair, and unyielding. The rancher, who had once called him a savage, now respectfully called him Mr. Yazzie. Inside the post, Maria Benali ran the store. She had found her place, not as Taze's wife, but as the indispensable heart of the new economy. She traded flour, coffee, and steel tools for the wool, silver and turquoise, her quick mind keeping the books, her 2 languages building trust where there had been none. By mid-morning, Eliza would set up her school on the long, shaded porch. 6 Navajo children, including Coda's younger sister, sat cross-legged next to the blacksmith's 2 sons and Private Jensen's wife. They were not learning history or politics. They were learning words. They drew pictures in the dust of horses and houses and learned the names for them in 2 languages. In the back room, Dr. Walter Hart ran his clinic. It was open to all. He set a soldier's broken arm, treated a Navajo baby's fever, and lanced a boil for a traveler on the stagecoach line. He was just a doctor again, and he had never been happier. The world, however, did not forget them. One hot afternoon, a new carriage appeared, this one fine and black, looking terribly out of place. Mr. Sims, the railroad man, stepped out. He was not wearing the dusty clothes of a conspirator. He was in a fine suit. Taze and Eliza met him on the porch. The children fell silent, watching. "Mr. Yazzie?" "Ma'am," Sims said, removing his hat. He looked nervous. "I am here on behalf of the Transcontinental. We have read the reports from the court-martial. Captain Pike's actions were reprehensible, unauthorized. It was a lie, clean and simple, but it was the lie of diplomacy. He acted without our consent," Sims continued, "and my employers wish to extend their apologies to the Navajo people and to make assurances." "What assurances?" Taze asked, his voice flat. The route, Sims said, unrolling a large map. It has been adjusted. We will be building, yes, but we will be passing 10 miles to the north. Your valley, this valley, it will be left in peace. We wish only for stable trade. Taze and Eliza looked at the new line on the map. It was not a total victory. The steel was still coming. The world was still changing. But the valley, their valley, was safe. They had bent the will of Washington, not with a war, but with the truth. We will require, Taze said, that your surveyors hire Navajo guides, and that you pay them a fair wage. Sims, seeing he had gotten off lightly, nodded eagerly. Of course, Mr. Yazzie, of course. That night, after the post was quiet, after the children were asleep and the doctor was cleaning his tools, Taze found Eliza. She was not on the porch. She was gone. He knew where to find her. He rode his horse up the canyon, to the place where the river ran deep, the place with the tall reeds and the undercut bank. She was there, sitting on a flat rock at the water's edge, her boots off, her bare feet trailing in the current. The moon was high, turning the water to silver. He came up behind her, making no sound. She did not turn. She had known he would come. She looked at her feet in the water, a small smile playing on her lips. Still warm, she whispered. He stopped, his heart so full he felt it might break. He stepped up behind her. He did not put his hands on her shoulders, as a friend would. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. It was an act of possession, of comfort, of absolute belonging. He pressed his face into her hair. It smelled of soap and dust and her. "So are you," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her back. "And now, you are mine." She relaxed into his hold, leaning her full weight against him. This was it. This was the safety she had been promised, not by a contract, but by a man's hands, by his courage. She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She looked up at him in the moonlight. He lowered his head. This was not the brief, interrupted moment in the pass. This was not the desperate, frantic grasp in the river. This was a choice. He kissed her. It was a kiss that held all the dust, the fear, and the fire of the last weeks. It was deep and slow and sure. It was the kiss of a man who had found the only thing he had ever truly wanted, and the kiss of a woman who had found the only place she had ever truly been home. It was a promise made without words, a seal on their new world. He held her as if he would never let her go, and she held him back, her body melting into his, safe at last. Eliza looked at the life she had built. She had been sent west to be a captain's wife, a quiet, obedient symbol. She was now a teacher, a trader, a partner, and a lover. She had lost her reputation, and in doing so, she had found her soul. She was no longer a virgin in any sense of the word. She had been touched by the world, by violence, by love, and she had been born again in it. Taze watched her as she slept later that night. The old ghosts were still there, the memory of his mother, the scars of the long walk. They would never leave him. They were part of the land, part of his blood, but they were no longer his only companions. He was not just a warrior, defined by what he fought against. He was a husband, a builder, a bridge. He had a future to fight for, and she was sleeping in his arms. The seasons turned. Winter swept down from the high peaks, cold and sharp, and was answered by a spring of defiant, startling green. The trading post at the river's bend, once a ruin, was now a place of life. The new wood of the walls had weathered to a soft gray. The school porch was marked by the shuffling of small feet. Dr. Walter Hart's clinic was known by travelers and Navajo alike as a place of clean bandages and fair treatment. A year had passed since the battle in the valley. News still came from the outside world. There was talk of trouble with the Apache to the south, of new gold strikes in the mountains. The railroad was a noisy iron scar 10 miles to the north, a constant reminder of the changing world. But in this one small valley, this fragile bridge between two communities, there was a tentative, hard-won peace. They chose to be married in the fall, When the air was clear and the cottonwoods along the river turned to gold, they did not choose a church or the council hogan or the sheriff's office. They chose the riverbank. They chose the exact spot where Eliza had hidden, the place of her terror, her shame, and her rebirth. It was, Taze had said, the place where she was born into his world. They all came. Hastian, the old headman, walked from the valley. He leaned on the arm of Coda. Coda's shoulder was stiff, and it would never again be strong enough to draw a war bow. But his arm was strong. He had spent the long winter learning to read Eliza's English books, his mind now his sharpest weapon. The hatred in his eyes, when he looked at Eliza, was gone. It had been replaced by a grudging, deep respect. He stood by his brother, his face serious. Maria Benali stood beside Eliza. She wore a bright calico dress, her black hair braided with blue ribbons. Her heart still held a small, private ache for what might have been. But her friendship for Eliza was true and strong. She was the maid of honor. The children from the school, Navajo and white, sat in a row on the sun-warmed rocks, holding bunches of purple wild asters. Even the new commander from Fort Red Butte had come. He was a young, practical captain, a man more interested in maps and logistics than in glory. He had been sent to replace Pike and to keep the peace, and he saw Taze Yazzie and Eliza Hart as his most valuable assets. He brought 2 soldiers with him. One of them was Private Jensen, who had been honorably discharged but had asked to stay, and who was now helping the blacksmith in Dustfall. It was a small gesture, but it was a sign. Dr. Walter Hart stood between Taze and Eliza. His hands shook as he opened his small, worn Bible. He had argued, gently, for a church, for a proper wedding. Eliza had simply taken his hand and led him to the river. "This is our church, Father," she had said. And he, looking at her radiant, unshakable face, could not argue. He did not read the traditional passages about obedience. He read from the book of Ruth. "Where you go, I will go," he read, his voice thick with emotion. "And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." When he finished, his eyes wet, Hastian stepped forward. He held a small, woven basket. He spoke in the low, sonorous tones of the Dine, his words a blessing for harmony, for children, and for long life. He took a pinch of sacred corn pollen. He touched it to Taze's head, and then to Eliza's. He sprinkled a circle of it on the earth around their feet, binding them to the land, and to each other. Then it was their time. Taze did not speak of love. Not at first. He faced Eliza, his hands holding both of hers. "I will not," he said, his voice clear in the still afternoon air, "hold you as a possession. I will not keep you as a man keeps a horse or a rifle. I will stand with you as a partner, as a warrior who fights at your side. My fight is for this land. My fight is for our people. And now, you are my fight. I am yours. Before this river, before this sky, I am yours." Eliza looked at him. She did not see the crowd. She did not see the soldiers or the elders. She saw only his eyes, the eyes that had watched her in the river, that had held her in the sandstorm. "I came to this land," she said, her voice steady and strong, "as a piece of property. I was promised to a man I did not know, in a contract I did not sign. My life was chosen for me." She squeezed his hands, her grip as strong as his. "Today, I stand here because I chose. I stand on my own feet, with my own heart, and I am free, and I use that freedom to choose you. Taze Yazzie, I will be your wife. I will be your partner. I will be your home." Hastian motioned them down. Taze and Eliza knelt together on the damp earth. Following the old man's gesture, they reached out. They touched the river first, the cold, clear water that had saved her, the water that had hidden them. Water, Eliza thought, where we met. Then they pressed their wet palms flat on the soil of the riverbank, the earth they had fought for, the earth that held Coda's blood and the Navajo's ancestors. Earth, Taze thought, what we protect. Finally, they looked up, past the canyon walls, to the vast, cloudless, impossible blue sky. They both thought The freedom we have earned. The ceremony was over. The children cheered, throwing their wild asters. Coda clapped Taze on his good shoulder. Dr. Hart embraced his daughter, weeping without shame, as the small crowd began to move toward the trading post for the feast. Taze pulled Eliza back. They were alone for a moment on the bank, the guests a polite distance away. Eliza grinned, a mischievous, private smile. She dipped her fingers back into the river. "You know," she whispered, her voice low and meant only for him, "the water is still warm." Taze's serious face broke into a rare, wide smile. He laughed, a deep, warm sound that startled the birds in the cottonwoods. He stepped close, pulling her against him, his arms circling her waist. "And now my wife is, too," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. "Come, Mrs. Yazzie, before the river gets jealous." They had found their peace, but it was a frontier peace. It was not silence. It was a balance. They had learned that freedom was not just about being free from chains. It was about having the right to choose the person you loved and the place you belonged. They had learned that justice, which seems so slow, is not a gift from above. It begins with the simple, terrifying courage of one person, or two, who dares to say no to a great wrong. They knew the future would be hard. The railroad was still there. New men, greedy for land or gold, would come. There would be new negotiations, new fights, new treaties to be signed and broken. But they were not alone. They had the trust of two communities, and they had each other. They talked of children. Children who would be born in the small room behind the trading post, not in a Hogan or a Boston parlor. Children with Taze's dark eyes and Eliza's stubborn chin. Children who would speak two languages, who would know the price of corn and the stories of the holy mountains. They would be the new world. They would be the bridge. That evening, as the moon rose over the canyon, they walked along the riverbank. Eliza was tired, her body full of food and joy, her feet aching from dancing with the children. Taze stopped, turned, and crouched. "Get on," he said. "What?" she laughed. "Get on my back. It is a long walk." She did, climbing onto his strong back, her arms wrapped around his neck, her head resting on his shoulder. He carried her easily, his steps sure and silent on the sand. Their two shadows merged into one, stretched long and dark before them in the moonlight. In the distance, from the high valley, they heard the sound of horses, a Navajo herd running free. The river flowed beside them. It was the same ancient river that had carved the canyon, the same river that had witnessed the blood and the fear, but here, in this one small place. Its water was not just a memory of history. It was a promise. It flowed on, carrying the story of a man and a woman who had refused to be enemies, and who had, against all odds, built a home. Thank you for listening to this story. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and share in this community. Please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, like this video, and give us some extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.